All right, we are super official and recording. And hello, everybody. Chance Paladin here. Whether you're watching on YouTube or DLive, I just want to say thank you and I appreciate you. And you are awesome and fantastic. This is the first book in my series, PNW Affliction. And thank you to Proud Grandma for prompting me quite firmly and sternly to do this. I was going to have text-to-speech do it, but if people are going to cheer me on, then I can do anything. So, without further ado, here we go. This is book number 1, Recycled, of the PNW Affliction series. Book number 1, this is the 2.5 edition. Someday it'll be a 2.6 edition. This is an urban survival story by yours truly, Chance Paladin. And this was originally written in the end of 2016, but I finished it in 2017. Latest update is right now in 2020. All rights are reserved. No portion of this book may be reproduced in any form without permission from the author, except as permitted by U.S. copyright law. And I would like to thank my wonderful wife, who I love very much, for being patient with me, even at the most difficult of times. Also, thank you to my cats for not walking on my keyboard too much while I'm trying to write these stories for you fantastic readers. Reminder that this is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living, dead, or actual events are purely coincidental. Also, this book is in memory of Anne-Marie. Justice was finally served, and someday, if you guys want offline, I will explain to you what all that's about. So, forward. The following story, the beginning of a series, takes place in a fictional location in the Pacific Northwest in the not-too-distant future. A region that used to be okay to raise kids in at some point through equal parts indifference and let someone else handle it while we go to work. We ended up in a society where values that used to keep us safe are quickly becoming perceived as the enemy. Inadequacy is being projected outward, and what used to keep us independent has become antiquated and brittle. Information passed down from generation to the next in the past now requires learning nearly from scratch. I'm tired of having to learn and rebuild key knowledge from scratch while our infrastructure crumbles around us, because some things once lost might take a very long time to rebuild again. Chapter 1. Getting Up. Home, subdivision, night of the collapse in the winter months. There I was one night, unable to sleep like usual. My cat wouldn't stop playing with a plastic bag on the floor. I guess she liked the noise it made. I'd moan for her to stop, half asleep, and she would, politely as always, waiting for a protective cocoon of limbo to show around my aura before she would start pat-patting the plastic again, thinking that was good enough to not bug me. Wrong again, cat. You know I sleep light. Third or fourth time it happened again, and I gave up trying to reason with the cat. I can't be mad at her. After all, she's special. She's actually had a rougher life than I have. She came from one of those cat halfway houses that pretend like they're saving the cats when really the so-called caretakers don't take care of the animals at all. But man, do they turn into invasive snoops as if they are qualified animal care inspectors. What a joke. My cat had very little care given to her at the temporary living facility, and I'll spare you, don't worry. Suffice it to say, the poor cat had suffered some trauma with her prior owners, which was sad because all the cat ever showed me was unconditional love. The cat, bless her heart, didn't know the meaning of too much love, so I figured out her special needs, and that's behind her now, and she's here passing on her special brand of personality onto me. So now I'm up, and the cat is confused that I'm up at a weird hour and forgets all about patting her plastic grocery bag for the second night in a row and just sits there. I put my glasses on and check her food and water, and of course both are at acceptable levels. My cat hardly eats anything, and her water is more for having staring contests into and then splashing everywhere, than wanting more water. Yeah, I know, anyway, you understand, she's a special cat. Now, however, the cat's break time is over and she resumes her attention to the bag. She seems to actually be upset at the bag at this point, like she isn't going to come into the other room now to follow me like she normally would. The situation would remain an issue unless the bag is removed, so I pick up the bag and stuff it into my pocket to later combine it with other similar bags I keep together. With barely the shred of a thought of what the bag could be doing in the room to begin with, I remembered that I'd been having those weird stupid dreams again about having a crappy job I don't like. This was at least the third or fourth night in a row, these awful dreams about a manager that's never happy with the hours I put in. Nobody else ever got challenged on their hours, only me, no matter how many hours I put in. Then if I work too many hours, I'm inefficient, whatever. Only one thing, the manager is close to 2 hours late every day and took a nearly 2-hour lunch with their friends. They also eat at their desk while emailing and socializing, then leave close to 2 hours early. Not before chewing me out about my billed hours for the week, of course. Talk about anxiety. I have the same dream every night and I can't shake it, so maybe it's time for a walk. I put on my normal going out clothes, my hat, flashlight, sidearm, and blades. That's my normal everyday carry, so don't judge me. I make my own safe space. So I take everything and stick it in its proper concealed area, then I throw an extra mag in my pocket. I go to grab my phone and realize it hadn't been plugged in overnight. I look at the battery and I'm pleasantly surprised to see it's about 3/4 power. This phone has such a great battery, I thought to myself. Built to last. I throw on my walking slippers and a hoodie, check all my pockets and belts for the important bits, and with everything in place, out I go into the inky yonder. Chapter 2. Going for a short walk. First, getting out the door, I lock the door. Gotta lock the door, nothing worse than worrying all day if you left your front door unlocked. Same with locking the car door. So many home invasions and car break-ins lately. Anyway, looking out into the world, it was a little drizzly out. Sort of drizzle, sort of fog, just the way I like it. The 2 infrequent street lamps were the only motivation to keep going, really. The flashlight stayed in a lower pocket of my khakis in case anything got too dark or needing to flag someone down or see in a dark place or whatever. So I just go with the natural light and letting my eyes adjust as appropriate. Everything was nice and quiet for a few blocks, then I realized something the further away I got from my home. I noticed I hadn't eaten anything before I left. I wasn't feeling weak yet, but decided to err on the safe side. I started heading towards the 24-hour convenience market that was nearby to pick up some Zorn bars. They were my favorite because they kept my sugar, protein, and carbs all at a nice balanced rate instead of giving me a big jolt up, only then to give me a big crash that left me feeling even worse than before. As I was thinking about how great a nice tasty graham cracker and peanut butter Zorn bar would be, and as my energy and sugar levels were definitely starting to go down, there was something else I started to notice out of my peripherals. The light, not all of them mind you, but some of the streetlights behind me had started to blip out. It wasn't so many to where it'd be an issue for a vehicle, but enough to cause pedestrians to need a flashlight because the curbs and such would be completely invisible in the darkness. The way forward seemed to have most of the street lights lit still. The main source of light coming from ahead of me was directed outward from the bright as heaven convenience store and gas station. The lights glowed off the sky and off every surface for several blocks in each direction. I ignored my instincts for some reason screaming at me to turn around and go home, and instead headed forward to get some nutrition before the walk back. As I started to get within a block from the Friendly Mart, I could hear several sirens in the distance. I stopped and turned behind me to try to angle my ears in the direction of the commotion, only to see that all but maybe 2 street lights had ceased to function. I assumed the sirens were headed in the direction of the cause, that the power company would be close behind, and that things would be resolved soon. I continued to finish the last steps across the parking lot towards the late night market. As I got to the doors, the sirens did not hold position or shut off. I stopped to listen to where they went as they faded too far in the distance to hear any longer. As I pondered that, it was time to enter the mini-market. Chapter 3. Shopping Attempt. Corner Store. Late Night. My night vision was having a lot of trouble adjusting to light from the gas station. It was too bright even for an afternoon sun in the summer. I squint to see through the semi-transparent doors because prior to opening them I can only see blurs due to the smudged up glass for the latest promos. I opened the door to see and hear better, wondering why there'd be extra people in the mini market when I only saw the clerk's car parked in his usual spot. Instead of being alone, though, there was a stressed-out man inside yelling and swinging his arms at the clerk. The rant was something about how responsibility of the social outage... Gosh darn it. The rant was something about how the responsibility of the... Crap, I don't know what that's supposed to say. I'm sorry. I better fix it. I opened the doors to see and hear better, wondering why there would be extra people in the mini market when I only saw the clerk's car parked in his usual spot. Instead of being alone, though, there was a stressed-out man inside yelling and swinging his arms at the clerk. The rant was something about how responsibility of the social outrage in more recent events fell on the clerk. The irate man was determined that the horrible situation that this apparently was a part of was all the clerk's fault. The angry man pointed out such anecdotal evidence, such as that all the lights were out but his store. Therefore, his religion must be attacking us or something. I had no clue what on earth religion the clerk could possibly be, but regardless, I immediately walked over to stand next to the clerk. The aggressive guy looked at me for a second and made an expression on his face like, "Why aren't you taking my side on this?" Anger quickly resumed as the dominant emotion, but with two of us in apparent alignment, he was forced to reconsider his odds. Within a few seconds, it was clear the angry man didn't know how to continue his simple plan and couldn't adapt fast enough. He stood there stunned, looking between us, wanting to say more, but clearly now defeated and going through the motions of acceptance. He looked between us about 5 times and then walked out the door with a jingle as he repeatedly shook his head to meander off to wherever it was he came from. After a few moments, when the clerk was sure the angry patron wouldn't come back, I heard a click-click from behind the counter. Down below and across, the clerk decocted a snub-nosed .357 revolver and put it back under the counter. "Thanks. The mess would have sucked," he said in a half-chuckle as his well-masked adrenaline started to wear off. I thought to myself that it's sad that store clerks have to deal with as much as they have to. That idiot must have been new to the area because the last group that tried to rob this place didn't go very well. All 3 left in bags. Turns out that clown masks and hoodies aren't super great at stopping horndery, critical defense 125 grain ammo traveling at 1,500 feet per second. In order for shotguns to work, you have to do things like have the safety off and have a shell in the chamber, all important details that people don't think about when they aren't expecting an actual fight. "No problem," I said back, trying to sound calm, but really that could have gone bad quick. Then mentioned that I was just glad to help and that I was here to get some snacks. Clerk said I could help myself to a few things on the house, but I wasn't having any of that. I grabbed a box of 5 Zorn bars, graham cracker, and peanut butter, of course. I also looked, and they had my favorite flavor of 20-ounce Monster energy drink, the green tea kind, which is stupid hard to find. It's the rejuvenating product line that doesn't have a sugary boost at the front, but doesn't have the resulting crash at the end either. You get a really nice alert feeling, which I really like, plus it's refreshing and doesn't leave me feel dehydrated. I had also seen these water packet products that were new on the market, Flexi Water. They were in a weird flexible bladder sort of thing that's hard to explain, so I grabbed some of those as well. I also thought to myself that I haven't changed the batteries in my flashlight in a while, and with that darkness stupidity outside, I thought it'd be a good idea to be extra prepared. You can never have enough batteries. Right then, there was a crash that sounded like it came from the direction of the gas pumps in the parking lot. The Friendly Mart clerk shouts to me to go out the back immediately as he simultaneously slams down on the emergency shutoff valve multiple times. I tried to explain to him that I hadn't paid yet, and he yelled, "Go now, pay later," and then rushed out towards the front towards the collision. Chapter 4, Parking Lot. I can't really decide why I chose to exit out the back like he said. I want to tell myself it was because he was in charge and that he was showing solid leadership. I might be overthinking it though, and it really hurts me to think this way, but I think the real reason is that it was more likely he was the captain in that one. That was his ship. His shutoff valve wasn't working, and the only other chance was the secondary shutoff. There would be no turning back from the secondary shutoff, and having a second person with him would be meaningless. Well, unfortunately, the secondary shutoff also failed for whatever reason. He didn't throw his life away, he simply took a calculated risk that he knew he had to take alone. Wherever he believes he goes when he passes on, I hope he knows he did the right thing, and I respect the heck out of him for that. As I was leaving out the back, the building went into exit-only mode. Not that I wanted to go back in anyway, and I got as far as I could as ancillary explosions started. Once I got to the corner of the block, I looked in the 3 available directions to try to see if the streetlight situation was contagious. I was really hoping for an easy circle around the block so I could efficiently get home. I didn't want to linger around the corner store and try to explain to the first responders how I had unpaid goods on me amidst this chaos. I couldn't offer any help anyway, and it isn't like emergency services were going to give me a ride home when obviously they were going to be busy. I noticed no sirens anyway, which supported my decision. It didn't make sense, and I waited longer. No sirens. As I considered returning to check on the clerk anyway, there were more explosions from my prior location. Despite the building being half a block away, the heat from the blasted inferno were becoming quite uncomfortable. I looked down the through roads again, trying to focus on the streetlights specifically. One of the streets wasn't even a through street, it was actually more of a residential back alley. It had no through street sign and didn't appear to go very far, and simply passed by electrical junctions. I recalled exploring that back street before. It had been lined on both sides with cracked out RVs. It was like a trailer graveyard with a mobile meth lab or two speckled in for good measure. There had been a county ordinance put in at some point, but it hadn't come easy. There had been a lot of pushback by people who didn't even live local, with the argument of, but they needed somewhere to live. Yeah, well, the response was good. They can go live in your subdivision then, and it was more or less settled because none of the neighboring communities were helping subsidize them, so off they'd get scattered only to regroup like migratory birds on an already poopy lake. The collection of mass homeless had sent local theft through the roof and even pushed out the local homeless who had already been relatively peaceful, occupying the local forest. The poor housing unit stuck behind the RV graveyard was getting burglarized nightly, and the tenants could barely even drive through the rubble anymore to get in. Of course, the wreckage depot over yonder was not to be confused with the actual graveyard that was nearby. It was well kept up, and the homeless stayed well away due to the staff that doubled as security. It didn't take long enough before the final available biohazard third-party contractor prices raised so high due to risk, safety, and personnel shortages that the county couldn't afford it. The work-released prisoners could come clean up technically, but not without a biohazard crew coming through. No biohazard crew, no cleanup. The RVs were leaking their human waste tanks into the storm drains, causing fines the county couldn't pay. Sure, you could find the RV owners, but they didn't have any money. You could impound the RVs, but that was kind of cost-effective to store, auction, or dispose of. So they'd come back with a vengeance. There was no way I was walking back there. Not enough ammo in the world. Well, there was, but you get the idea. A few campfires destroying the concrete crackled and flickered behind the dilapidated wreckage. Shortly after, I heard stirring and shuffling of sneakers on broken glass as they rallied together to see what they could loot from the burning corner store. So that only left me with 2 options to get back home. The options are down to 2 streets now, and one of the streets has nearly half its lights out already. I checked all the directions in the intersecting roads that I could. There were no cars or no people anywhere, so I crossed the only feasible road I could to hopefully find a way back home. And still no sirens. Chapter 5. Taking the Long Way Back. As soon as I stepped on this road, I definitely remember feeling more positive. Having the street lights on was nice. Being audibly and physically away from the fire and explosions was also nice. I remember taking a minute to really collect myself. I still had the goods from the corner store in my hands. I remember thinking to myself how there was so little I could do for the store clerk. I told myself that when I woke up in the morning, I'd write something nice about him online to memorialize how brave and polite he was. It was all I could do as a coping mechanism at the moment to not let the loss absorb me. In the shock and chaos, I had got this far without even realizing it. I would look really weird if anyone noticed. I unpacked all but one of my energy bars from the box. I opened the one I kept out and took a bite from it, and then put the remainder in one of my cargo pockets. I folded the energy bar box up flat and stuffed it in a back pocket. Then I put the water bladders in each of my remaining empty cargo pockets as I had planned for them, and remembered to take my gun belt and cinch it up even tighter to compensate for the weight. I knew my belt can handle the additional weight, no problem. As I finished chewing the first half of my energy bar, I tried to gently shake my energy drink because it's supposed to be shaken according to the instructions on the can. I didn't want to overdo it and create a mess and noise, so I thought of an alternative measure. I turned the can upside down and then right side up, and tried to swish it around a little bit and open it as quietly as possible. The air escaping made a mean hissing noise, like the can was mad at me for not shaking it so it could explode. I wondered to myself if the other methods of can opening would have been quieter. I took a sip of my beverage to make sure my palate was staying evened out between food and moisture. When it seemed appropriate, I slammed the other half of the energy bar into my mouth, began chewing, and started on my way. I tried to do all this before I could draw any attention to my strange behavior and situation. I started walking forward with confidence like I belonged there and shoved the energy bar wrapper in my pocket where I had stuffed the energy bar box. Out of my peripherals, I saw nothing moving either to my left or my right and went on my way. As I walked down the road, I was thinking to myself that I guess everyone was sleeping through the explosion, fire, and me standing there. Maybe when they didn't hear the sirens, they just assumed it wasn't an emergency. What was wrong with people? Whatever, who cares? So I went a block or two, sort of perpendicular to where my house would have been. Hoping to make another 90-degree turn in order to be parallel with my street, I checked block after block and on every single street. The lights are out into pitch black. Here's the weird thing. Not only are the street lights out, but I notice a concern about a block or two down. The street lights are out, and the porch lights are out, which makes absolutely no sense. I have traveled maybe 6 blocks now, sipping my energy drink as I go, heading towards an older industrial area, but I turn around to see if maybe it would be better to head back to the corner shop. Surely the gas company or someone would have headed out there by now, maybe to make sure no other gas lines got ruptured in the explosion? Shouldn't there be power companies out trying to fix the light situation also? Anyway, it doesn't matter because when I looked back about 2 blocks behind me, the lights were out. That meant there were 4 solid blocks of pitch black between any light and where the corner store was, or rather where it would have been. Rest in peace, Mr. Store Clerk. The inferno was still going at the gas station and wasn't providing light to where I was, since the fire was physically around a corner about half a block, several blocks back. Ahead I could see where there was an intersection and a road that would have then again put me parallel with my street, so that was a good sign. In case you were wondering, there was also enough light in this direction to get to the next intersection. I continue to sip on my energy drink as I make my journey, noting some ambient critter sounds as I pass what must have been a pond and or a stream. I have no idea what the creature may be, as I couldn't see anything past the light that the street lamps provided. I made it to the intersection and noticed there was a bus stop here and a garbage can. This would be a more reasonable place to actually take a few minutes to collect myself without drawing suspicion. I took the energy bar wrapper out of my pocket and crumpled it and set it in the garbage can with distinction since it was not recyclable. I noticed to myself that this garbage can was not overflowing and seemed pretty well kept. That was neat and made me happy. This was not one of the special garbage cans that had separate recycling receptacle, unfortunately. I distinctly remember having the idea to check the bus times and cross-referencing with my phone. Yes, the buses would have been running at that time, and no, the bus never came. I would have been there about 2 minutes before the bus was technically scheduled to arrive and stayed about 5 minutes later. On top of that, there hadn't been a single vehicle the entire night, besides the sirens I heard early and whatever hit the gas station. If you're wondering why I never called anyone, I didn't have anyone to call at the time. It wasn't really an emergency other than it was really dark. I checked the news while my phone was awake. The news wasn't updating, but that wasn't unusual because any news feeds used cell data and it took an eternity to update if they updated at all. There was only a single cell tower servicing this entire area, and it was not owned by my carrier, which meant service was additionally poor. Not only had real news slowed down, but it hadn't been covering very much that wasn't important lately. Also, news takes physical people to manually update. I took a sip of my energy drink, then checked Twitter, which I only have foreign people on, and as usual, they were up their own ass judging everyone else on narrow-minded political views that made no sense while ignoring their own colossal implosions. I took another sip from my energy drink, then checked Facebook after that for local happenings, but everyone was asleep, so there was no updates. I checked the time, and this being winter months, there was still around 6 hours of darkness left at least. I needed to keep moving to get home. The last thing I decided to check was the map application on my phone to make sure I was still on the right track to the house, even though I was sure I already was. Sure enough, taking a turn here was going to put me parallel, and then in around 8 blocks, then another few blocks, it was going to put me back at my subdivision again. Perfect. The cellar GPS didn't tell me this. I kept all of the maps loaded natively on my phone for circumstances such as these. Chapter 6. Back on track. I took a turn, leaving the bus stop, finally heading down a street parallel to my own again. I scanned back 90 degrees to where I had come to see that the lights were off no more than 2 blocks back. It took a second to register, but I noticed as I moved my head that there was a human-shaped shadow about 20 yards behind me. The shadow was moving at a moderate speed. It wasn't an intercepting pace, but quite deliberate. I locked my hearing in that direction to the shuffles on the concrete that are so clear to me now. To not get tunnel vision, I scanned the other direction 90 degrees, then back to see that both directions were nearly completely blacked out, including houses and street lamps. Thankfully, no new shadows. I matched my speed to match the new condition, and then exceeded it enough to put a comfortable distance between who had emerged behind me and then headed in my predetermined direction. As I was getting my speed appropriate, I narrowly missed another shadow forming out of the darkness off a grassy woods path. I had little time to assess, and then headed across the street where I knew it would certainly turn from forest to full industrial and hope I wasn't walking out of one issue and into another. I had obviously disturbed one of the indigenous homeless groups, which I didn't mean to. I didn't have a problem with them, but the way they simply sneak up without saying anything has always frustrated me. I hated feeling captive to them also, once they initiate, so I never felt the risk worth seeking audience when potential confrontation could be avoided. I made it about half a block before I realized I didn't hear the pair shuffles anymore and turned around to see nobody there. I looked around and figured they must have gone back to their shelter and solution for surviving this event. A part of me regretted not stopping to talk to them, but another part of me reminded me it was just as possible that they were off their meds. It could have been an ambush for all I knew. As I started walking down the road, I realized the rest of my energy drink had sloshed out in the brisk walk from the shadowy threats. As I checked to see how much of the liquid got on me, I lamented having to immediately leap to the conclusion that people approaching me must always have ill intent. I put the now empty energy drink can in my jacket pocket where it fit snugly. As my heartbeat slowed back down to my version of normal, I wish we all lived in a society where everything could simply be happy and safe, but then I realized it was completely impossible and completely out of our control. All we could control was ourselves, and that was the sad grim reality. Every step I took and every dilapidated and decrepit building I passed was more irrefutable evidence of the failure of that very idea. Not that I had all the answers. In fact, just like so many other people that think about this, we only communally know a lot of what's wrong, with no idea really how to make things right. All anyone knows is that the system needs to be rebuilt properly, but how do you get to the reboot? Simply standing back and letting the system fail seems horrible, but we've been cut out of the process for a long time. All we've been seemingly to be able to do is delay the inevitable. I think about it as I walk a block or so down, then I look behind me out of curiosity. I see that the block behind me to the corner block and all the adjacent blocks are in the dark. I continued my pace forward, not fully looking ahead, but looking to the sides of the buildings. I stopped to think to myself in front of a building with a triangle with arrows pointing itself at all three angles. Then I think about the three rules of society, which are war, peace, and revolution. Chapter 7. The Large Building. I take a few steps towards the building, maybe more subconsciously, as if to focus on the thought I was trying to make. With that, I was able to think more clearly. Nobody ever seems to be happy with peace, meaning they aren't happy with the way things are. They always think they can make things better. This is partially because others, nearly immediately, who were prior abusing wars for gains, begin to abuse peace for their own gains. People can see it for what it is eventually, so in a way, life is like this building with the triangle logo. With that thought, there's more rustling nearby. It sounded like something smaller than before, thankfully. I remember being unconcerned with the small rustle of leaves nearby, assuming it was a squirrel or some such nesting animal, as there wasn't any wind that night. That was nice, because I would have been really cold, all things considered. I took the opportunity to look around and realized that the direction I was going only had a few buildings left that appeared to have power. This startled me as I had been checking out the buildings, and I looked behind me and noticed that the lights, all of the lights, were off a block behind me as well. The few buildings on this block that would have had power due to normal business routine still had power, and the streetlights had power, but obviously at this rate it wasn't going to be much longer. I had to find some place where I could reasonably hold out until whatever this was could pass. The shops with power would have alarms, and those were people's businesses. I wasn't going to damage them to survive when those people would have to incur the situation the next morning due to my lack of planning. That wasn't fair to those people who were somehow able to survive the gentrification, the minimum wage hikes, the crippling taxes, the moves overseas, free trade zones, union insanity, and all the other ridiculousness that did everything but actually create jobs. I needed to find something that was fair and low impact that was actually going to work. I wasn't going to damage a working building no matter what this night put me through. I carefully scooted as close to the triangle logo building as I could with my natural night vision. I did that to make sure nobody saw me and so I wouldn't alert anyone that may be nearby. I got about 10 feet and heard something shuffle from a shrub to another shrub behind me, and so I smirked to myself. I was thinking that animals were so funny and this was probably a game to some critter. Oh well, I was simply glad it was having fun, probably playing the animal equivalent of Ninja Stalker or something. As it got even darker, my night vision got even better at this point. I thought to myself that there was no moon out at all. Where was it? What are those called, new moons? I have no idea. Suffice it to say, if there was a new moon or young moon or whatever, it was so low in the sky or was behind a mountain or a thick layer of clouds. Whatever it was useless to me, and I know it was being overcast tonight wasn't helping either. I was thinking about this and letting my night vision get better, and decided to shove my second energy bar in my mouth, so that's exactly what I did. With as little noise as possible, I got the bar out, tore it open, and shoved half of it in my mouth. I tried to chew the bar enough to where I wouldn't get the hiccups, since I knew I couldn't drink from the unfamiliar new water bottles in the darkness. After several minutes of being sure I was going to hold the energy bar down properly without hiccuping, I shoved in the second half. Then I crumpled up the wrapper and stuck it in my pocket so I could hopefully find a garbage can later. At this point, my night vision was surprisingly good enough to where I could vaguely make out the walls and could make my way to the side of the building. There was no way I was going in front for a myriad of reasons. Some explanations will have to be saved for another day. Suffice it to say, the front of the building is the most secure, so let's leave it at that for now. I know this because I used to test the security of buildings and other things. Anyway, moving on. Chapter 8. The Receiving Ingress. So I made it to the side building because I wanted to make absolutely sure nobody was going to be seeing me from the main road once I started using artificial light. Even a little bit of light attracts attention from an extremely long distance in the darkness. I was looking specifically for some kind of ingress, as usually buildings of the size of a loading dock or bicycling entrance. I needed an abnormal entrance that I could use my experience to get into without compromising all the existing infrastructure. After all, someone still owned this building, even if it was just a bank overseas somewhere or whatever. It would be providing me safety, so I wanted to treat it as if it was my own. I finally see the beginnings of what I was looking for, which was an inlet portion of the structure. This would provide a line-of-sight block from the road by 25 feet or so. I figured to myself this must be the beginning of some sort of receiving dock. I walked a few feet in, and honestly it was absolutely pitch black at that point, and got my flashlight out finally. Before you answer a bunch of questions about this flashlight, this isn't some kind of holy cow $130 tactical warhead flashlight. It can't signal down ocean liners and 80-foot waves for that 100-year storm, blah blah blah. It's actually the opposite sort of. I picked this flashlight out because it had a soft light that didn't blind me, didn't give me migraines, and took 3 AAAs, which meant the thing could go forever if you wanted to put lithiums in it. It could really put out decent light, wide enough, but not very far, for a long time, and also had an added feature of including a laser built into it. A laser? A laser? Why on earth would you need a laser? Well, if you secure the light to something like a shotgun, then you have a shotgun with a laser, and you can alternate between which mode you want. For example, in my case, it turns out the cats really like it. It's a laser that lasts forever instead of the ones with a watch battery that only lasts like 20 minutes. This flashlight lasts forever on 3 of the right kind of AAAs. It also has a strobe, but it's a really slow strobe that doesn't give me seizures as I cycle through the modes. I think that function is absolutely absurd, so anyway, the flashlight isn't perfect. The price was right, though, and it does what I want, so enough about the flashlight. I click my flashlight on, and it turns right on, as it has a million times before. It has an almost ghostly matte glow flattening over the building's walls ahead. As I scanned the wall along that edge of the building, I was looking specifically for any kind of automated keyless entry panel. It didn't take long to find it, because usually there are people coming in and out at weird hours to buildings like this. I shut my flashlight off. Most of my night vision returns, and I used memory for the rest of finding where I was going. With my vision adjusted for the darkness, I carefully make my way over to the door and sit down. As I'm getting my phone out, I stretch my legs and hear something bonk and start to wobble. I reach out to stop the wobbling object and grab something bowl-shaped. I press the object to the ground and stop the wobble, then pick it up and set it closer to me. With that done, I forget about it for a minute and get back to my work phone. The first thing I need to do to start my research is figure out what the building's name is. I know I had driven by it before taking alternate routes for construction, but for the life of me can't remember the name of the place. I know the map software takes up most of the battery, but I use it first. I hit the Find Me button to get the address. With the address, copy-paste the address, save it to the clipboard, and close the map application out. Use the address and cross-reference with the building listings, and success, I came up with a name. Waste Trash Fiercely Recycling Center. That brought back a memory in the past of seeing the name and thinking how awesome it was. The word waste was on the left part of the logo, the green triangle with the arrows pointing to each next part. The word trash was on the right part of the logo, and the word fiercely was on the bottom part of the logo. It was organized right clockwise, if you can imagine, and the words recycling center were to the right. One word below the other. It was pretty catchy, and it would have taken me quite some time to come up with something that looked that cool, but then again, I always thought the recycling logo really looked cool, so hey. Right around this time, I started to get thirsty and used the ambient light from my phone to figure out how to open one of the weird water bottles I'd got from the store. Once I got it open, I started to carefully sip from it. I separately put the wrappings and the heavy plastic cap in a different pocket, and half absent-mindedly and half obsessive-compulsive poured some in the dish next to me. Then I snapped the cap back down and closed the bottle. Put the water bottle back in my pocket and went back to my phone to search for password clues. Through having the company name, I was able to pull up their old forum they had on a separate server from their company domain. They seemed like really good people and built a community culture where they were all friends outside of work. I eventually found a post saying, "I keep forgetting the code," and thought maybe the code would be right there, so I opened it up, noticing by now that my phone was starting to get into lower 1/3 of battery power. From my past experience, this meant I really had no clue how much power and time I had left. The message on the forum said the foreman in response to the post, "If you keep forgetting the code, you need to ask the groundskeeper to let you in." This post had several upvotes and an answered highlighted. The original poster responded with a thanks, and there were several positive responses after that. I didn't see anything else informative, so I closed my browser out and shut all the rest of the apps off and put it back in sleep mode to conserve the battery and to collect my thoughts. That's when I noticed a sound next to me, a sort of lapping and plastic on concrete shuffling noise. Apparently, during my phone investigation time, I had made a new friend. There was what could only loosely be described as a cat next to me. Upon closer inspections, I determined it was almost more than a cat, as it was oversized in a few places. "I suppose this is your place," I said to the cat, and it looked at me as if debating whether it would even really dignify me with a response. The look it gave me was as if to say, "The monkey is talking again. What does the monkey want?" So I left my hand hanging there and simply sat quietly. It was getting even colder, and there were still 4. No, that was being too kind. Maybe 5 more hours until daylight. Even in a perfect world with a cat piled on me, it was going to be extremely difficult to survive this situation. The ground was cold, which wasn't going to help. It wasn't like there were pallets left out so I could get off the ground. I had knives, but I mean, please, I wasn't going to be making a fire here. I lacked the material, the means. It might attract the wrong attention, so just overall a bad idea. It was going to have to be only me and Monster Cat, so the cat was going to have to stare at my dangling hand and finish the water, and we'll figure out where to go from there. A few minutes had passed, and my heart had almost finished sinking when I glanced out the corner of my eye to see the cat gone, only to feel the cat shove up against my other side with a brrrt noise. It wasn't so much in the form of a question, but almost as a statement, as if to say, "You are my friend now." I put my arm on the cat and got a few more burp burp noises as if to say, "Sorry if that wasn't clear. What I meant to say was, you are my friend." The message also seemed to say, "And if you are mean to me, there will be consequences." That made me happy and even more respectful because the cat definitely had confidence, and I liked that. Around the time of that thought, I felt that the cat was brushing something metallic up against my arm, like maybe it had a collar and the collar had a metal-style tag. Was oversized cat trying to tell me something or just loving me up? I turned my phone on to possibly shed light to see what it was, and the cat bolted. Crap, I thought to myself. Was that my only chance? Had I offended the cat? No, man. My next steps needed to show the cat that it was just a miscommunication and a mistake. I was trying to think how to project innocence and to show that it was my fault and that I took responsibility. I also needed to do something fast before the cat completely disengages. I should have been slower with revealing the light, so I set my phone down on the ground with the light on at the risk of letting the last 1/3 battery run out, and the cat slowly came back on its own pace, sniffed and pawed at it, and hovered in the light long enough for me to see the digits on the collar. I grabbed the phone slowly, sat up, stood up, punched the code in the keypad before I forgot the numbers. Upon completing the combination, there was a sound of a bolt unclicking. This was a mechanical keypad lock and thus didn't require batteries. I opened the door and used the phone as the light to see inside. The cat rushed in like this was a normal thing, and I followed. Chapter 9. Outer Receiving Office and Recyclery. With the door shutting behind us, I put my phone back in sleep mode. I checked my pockets for the important bits, wallets, keys, etc. I got my flashlight out and turned it back on, scanning the room quickly for some reason, immediately expecting the worst, but thankfully nobody was there. It was exactly as I thought. The place had been abandoned, but the bank never actually repossessed it. This was extremely common with banks foreclosing on properties faster than they had the resources to manage the properties when there was nobody to even sell the properties to. It left millions out of work and factories and warehouses in every city completely vacant that used to employ thousands. So as I was thinking about all this, I was scanning my surroundings looking for materials and gathering clues about how many resources I would have access to. This tiny room was out of the elements, but it was only a steel door, and this room wasn't exactly much warmer as I could still see my breath a little bit. I would have needed some blankets or heat still, and there was no electricity, so I needed to keep searching for supplies. Figuring out what kind of room it was would give me clues as to what I might be able to find in here. The first thing I noticed is it seemed to be a segmented off receiving only area for drivers. This meant most likely the door I saw in front of me leading to the rest of the facility was going to be locked. I checked to make sure and it was locked and completely solid. As I pointed my ghostly flashlight from area to area, I also opened every cabinet I could find just to see what I could find. It was typical stuff you would find in a receiving office, such as pens, extra receiving paperwork, and miscellaneous office equipment. A heavy steel shutter separated the receiving office from what would be the rest of the building. If the shutter was lifted, a little clerk's booth would be on the other side. That shutter wasn't going anywhere, so it was bolted down from the other side with a heavy bolt and strong clasp. I did manage to find some extra batteries in a drawer during my search, though, and to my approval they were AAA lithium batteries, so I grabbed 3 and put them in my pocket. I heard something move in the greater warehouse, and I snapped my flashlight off and waited. 5 long, cold minutes passed, and no new sounds. I clicked my flashlight back on and resumed my search. There was an empty spot on the wall where the first aid kit was supposed to be, and the food vending machine was empty of anything of nutritional value. There was no power running to it anyway, and I was committed to not vandalizing the facility. I moved from the higher cabinets and waist-high cabinets to lower cabinets and found some cat food and another bowl, but no name on it. I hadn't seen Monster Cat in a while, but figured maybe he was tired of eating his cuisine of whatever he was catching outside, and figured I was the guy who was going to get him back to his routine. I first made sure the food smelled dry, and it did, and poured some in the dish. Within a few seconds, the cat appeared again, snarfing down the food. I scooted the dish over to a corner so I wouldn't disturb the cat, and caused myself to be on the menu by mistake. I looked on the bag, hoping for a clue as to the cat's name maybe, but nothing. Every receiving office had a bathroom for the drivers, and this one was no different. I opened the door, and it was well taken care of. I left the sink on a drip for the cat and proceeded to use the bathroom. This gave me a moment to think, and I decided that in this moment I would turn my cell phone completely off. This warehouse was going to be a cell signal dead zone, or at least severely drain my battery, as my phone would be trying to boost its signal trying to reach out to the nearby tower. Also, with the power going out around here, or whatever was happening, it would only be a matter of time before the cell towers ceased to function also. Cell towers, I think, all had emergency generators, but they didn't last long usually. Maybe only a few hours at best. The tower shutting down would drain my cell phone battery the worst, as my phone tried desperately to find a signal. There'd be no way to estimate when that could happen, so I needed to shut my phone off soon regardless. I did still have a tiny signal, but still nobody to call. No real emergency either. With such a weak signal, my apps requiring data wouldn't work at all. Data was always the first to go, then voice, then text. Thinking more about the water, it occurred to me that the water still functioned properly here. I supposed that this was because the bank had taken over the water payments. They must have intended on using the facility, then stopped paying attention. Leaving the water on didn't really cost the bank anything, I guess, as long as it wasn't running. The pipes weren't at risk of freezing inside the building either. I checked the time on my phone I checked the time on my phone one last time. Figured I had something like 3.5 hours left until sunrise. Then I shut the phone off and put it in my pocket. I finished my business about the same time as the cat, and as soon as the cat was done with the sink, I washed my hands and shut the sink off. Then the cat and I walked back into the main receiving room. I was at a loss for what to do at this point. I know I couldn't stay in this room again because it was too cold. I had only made it this long because I kept progressing, moving, and staying positive. If at any point I had stopped, I would start to cool down and it would be very dangerous for my body. It felt like 40 degrees and my thermal hoodie was only keeping me as warm as I was staying. It couldn't get me any warmer like a heavier jacket would. I had to make it through this next set of doors, but honestly there was no way through them. Since I was completely out of options, I asked the cat, "Hey cat, how do you get through the doors?" The cat seemed to look at me almost puzzled, and sort of like it had a memory from a long time ago. Then it seemed like the memory wasn't from so long ago, then it balanced somewhere in the middle. The cat then quickly moved, and before I could really shine my light exactly on where the cat was, it disappeared literally straight through a wall. I lost sight of the cat a few feet from the door under a steel bench. That's when I heard an audible click, 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 click in the mechanism adjacent to the door lock. I reached to the door and pulled, and it held strong for a split second. With a click, click, the door flung open with me holding the handle with weight on it. I sprawled backwards due to the door opening at an awkward tempo to my pulling's rhythm. As I fell, the doorknob slipped out of my hand. The door immediately started to close under its own weight, including support from the springs and the hydraulics in the above mechanism. I landed on my side with no grace, crunching the energy drink can in my pocket against my body. I reacted quickly, scooting myself along the tile floor with one big push, then catching the door with my foot. Breathing a sigh of relief, I bent my leg to open the door a comfortable margin. Deciding not to risk getting up and fumbling again, I crawled on my hands and knees into the main body of the warehouse. Chapter 10. Inner Receiving Office. Safely inside, I got up and muscle memory patted all of my important pockets for the important bits again. I let the door close behind me quietly, trying not to disturb the building. Confirming everything was in place on my person, I looked around the warehouse for a second, then looped around to the right to go inside the clerical office. It was the next logical place to check. As I got closer, I heard noises coming from there. As I head towards the clicking, I discover the source of the door unlocking. The cat was pawing on a pressure pad on the clerk's desk. The cat saw me as I came in and stopped pawing at the pressure pad. The cat was very proud of itself to see that its efforts paid off. The cat was probably confused as to why the door was open for so long it didn't close in the normal duration, but now at the reunion all was forgotten. I gave the cat a pat on the head to let it know that I was thankful, but then its ears went down. We both at the same time heard more crashing, and off the cat went into the darkness. I would listen, and if it sounded like the cat needed my help, I would put down whatever the problem was. Otherwise, the cat had been around for a long time, so I can't imagine there were any issues the cat couldn't handle, right? With another chill passing through me, I took a swig of water and decided to check deeper into the receiving office before moving on. I checked underneath every desk for signs of space heaters. There were several due to employees wanting different temperatures due to warehouses typically being unable to stabilize and control the internal climate. Unfortunately, all the units were electric only, which meant I couldn't use any of them with the power off. That's when I noticed there was a cat-sized door between the inner and outer receiving office shared wall. Very clever. I took a closer look at the pressure pad that the cat had been able to activate and assumed it was a simple circuit on a 9-volt battery that probably lasted forever. I'm not an electrician, but that was just my guess. Resuming my search, I didn't find any blankets and assumed they'd all gone home with their owners. I found some spare raincoats next to some umbrellas, but those would offer no additional warmth, unfortunately. For whatever reason, when I wear a raincoat in the Pacific Northwest, it always makes me feel colder. I did notice that one of the umbrellas was red and white and a uniquely specific shape. I nodded approvingly at the style and hoped they didn't miss their umbrella too much. But yeah, seriously, who wears a raincoat here unless you're staying out all day? I guess that's a rhetorical question because that's probably who the coats were intended for. They have those neat reflective bands all over them, and the coat's base colors were orange. I imagine they were probably worth a lot too. The employees here left them behind because they felt like it would have been theft. That reminds me to check the pockets, and sure enough, I was able to find some heavy half-rubber, half-plastic hybrid Kevlar-type material working gloves in one of them. Those would actually be fairly warm for a while. I put the gloves in one of my pockets because if I had to stay put, I would want to put those on as an extra layer if I needed my hands untucked from my sleeves. That's a trick we do here when it's super cold. And that is what I've been doing most of the night. There was nothing else of use in here, no vending machines. The break room and everything must have been in another area, which makes total sense. Everything else was office supplies, so it was time to move on and find the main office or a kitchen. Chapter 11. Back to the main warehouse. Before moving back out into the main warehouse, passing my flashlight's beam across the facility was essentially pointless, as the facility was multiple football fields in length from any single position. My flashlight was reaching maybe 20 to 30 feet distance, which was enough for me to guess which way headed further into the facility and which way went further towards the office. So further towards the office I went. I could tell from the organization of the building so far that they had underwent several iterations of continual improvement, and it seemed to have been going fairly well. When I passed by the main metric board and looked at it for a minute out of habit more than anything, I noted all the metrics trending upwards under pretty strict upper tolerances. Each of the sublines had a metric that filtered up to this board's main metrics, which was pretty cool. There appeared to be 6 disassembly lines total, which were plastics hard, plastics soft, metals, which was branded like a heavy metal band, batteries, paper, products, and glass. There was also a time since last injury, which was crossed out with a safety is everyone's responsibility sign next to it. Next to that was a if you see it, report it sign. That must mean the lunchroom was nearby because, yep, that looks like an HR corkboard. Next to that, sure enough, is always the lunchroom, and sure enough, that is where it was. Chapter 12, Employee Lunchroom. I passed by the HR corkboard, and only out of my peripheral vision noted that the standardized templates that included the anti-harassment document, the minimum wage documentation, the anti-corruption documentation, and so on. I recognize its existence and feel comfort more than anything, as I couldn't imagine working in a world where that board did not exist. That would include even if sometimes those rules don't seem to apply unilaterally across the employee spectrum. As I made my way into the lunchroom, I was thinking more about the whistleblower policy. I reminded myself that it doesn't only mean that we strive to make sure, for example, to address when the whistleblower policy is disrespected, it also means that the full weight of punishment and transparency comes down on those who deviate from the policy. It also addresses those who abuse the policy for their own personal gains, so that they are also not shielded by protections that the policy entails. The integrity of those policies has to be protected on both sides. This is so either side abusing the policy can't diminish the value to the point to where people will not come forward anymore, even anonymously. Also, so that abuse can't continue and escalate based off the information gathered. This is true for all the policies. All that being said, this place seemed to get it. I'm in my 3rd room or so of this place, and I don't feel like women would have felt out of place here, and neither would have minorities. Meaning basically that I wasn't seeing anything super offensive like calendars with scantily clad ladies or gang paraphernalia. As I looked around some more, I saw all of the proper bending and proper lifting posters. And there were even all those stretches you were supposed to do before work. It was also all the moves to do so you didn't pull any muscles or whatever that you weren't supposed to. I even checked in detail and I didn't see any weird extra appendages or anything drawn on any of the depictions. Everything I saw so far simply seemed respectful and understood. As I walked over to the giant dual refrigerators, all I saw was continued evidence of a cohesive team. There were no notes about people poisoning lunches due to thieves, only positive messages about trying to be thankful. There was also the requisite note about how the fridge gets cleaned out on Friday, so don't be that guy. That made me chuckle. There were even crayon drawings from what must have been people's kids. I imagine these works of art were to remind the workers routinely what they were invariably working for. It also made me wonder how many pay cuts they took before the facility finally closed down. I don't remember this place having layoffs. It simply shut down out of nowhere one day. I guess they couldn't fight off overseas taking over recycling and dealing with the organized crime recycling rings. When you coincide those situations with the nightly citywide vandalism that the police were too buried to deal with in the cities recently, it almost have been too much. What a freaking mess. And with that thought, I held my breath and opened the fridges. To my amusement, they were all sparkling clean. There was absolutely nothing in them. That goes to show, wow, they took so much pride in this place. With that, I closed the fridges, and that's when I heard something slide along the side of the fridge and fall. I angled the flashlight around until I found what it was, and a backpack had slid down. The bag was nothing big or tactical. It was a small pack, enough for possibly a soccer ball at most. They must have missed the pack cleaning up. It was empty, but I grabbed it and threw it on anyway. It helped me to carry extra goods as I went. Even if it would only hold a few items, the pack would still be very useful. There were no ovens or stoves in here, only microwaves, so this wasn't the real kitchen. So there wasn't much in here besides plastic utensils and a couple of mugs left behind. I still wasn't excited about drinking the water because all I could remember was hearing about how water in the pipes set and how the lead sinks in. I didn't even want to think about it, and I was sure I had enough water. Still, I hoped I could find a few water bottles to last a few more hours, so I left the sinks alone. Yes, I know I said I washed my hands with the water from them. I used soap, and yes, I know I said the cat drank the water as well. In my defense, the cat had been drinking the water around here all this time, including probably out of the creek and the pond nearby and the puddles. So far, nobody had been able to explain to me worth a darn how cats can drink water that would probably kill people. So, with more about the water out of the way, let's move on. At this point, I finished looking at all the walls with positive comments for a little encouragement of my own, and then decided to sit down for a minute and just imagine what it must have been like. This room must have sat a few hundred people through the day. That seems to match with how much food would have fit in those two gigantic refrigerators and how much they could have microwaved with the entire bank of microwaves at once. They probably ran 2 shifts of lunches at 11 a.m. and 12 p.m. The blue-collar staff numbers would have been floating around 250 at that point, and the white-collar support probably would have been something like 25 to 35. I imagine all the camaraderie and all the funny stories that would have been shared in here. I imagine everyone asking how everyone's weekends were and all the people that asked what they were doing for the weekend. I hoped to myself that they included everyone and didn't relegate their conversation to only obnoxious and exclusive topics such as sports. To be clear, I'm not a sports hater. It's only that there was another big society in the past that spent all of their time focused on coliseums while their culture got destroyed around them. It was flat out frustrating trying to get work done and team build while everyone shared meaningless stats on something they only by proxy participated in. Then, out of that group of so-called fans, most would just hop from one team to another as soon as the team they said they liked tanked. If that wasn't enough, the one that did like a specific team would either have their favorite players traded or their team would move. When that wasn't happening, people were suffering permanent brain injuries or being violent domestic abusers. When it wasn't that, it was them hurting each other during the sport on purpose, but to make it look like an accident, or using performance-enhancing drugs to give them unfair advantages. One player would be using drugs, causing 2 to use drugs to compete, and then it would exponentially increase. During this, the players were still making a fortune, while the people running the system made even more. This included all the advertisers, drug pushers, and sports gamblers. There were also many instances of the teams' names and mascots that we grew up with being considered racist for no reason. Then, just when you thought the sport couldn't sink any lower, players weren't even standing for the national anthem anymore. But wouldn't you know it, people kept watching and supporting it. I was so happy I never started. Looking around, I didn't feel like they were absorbed in sports here, as I saw absolutely nothing about sports teams. That made me happy, as I'm sure it did a lot of other people as well in its time. I have nothing against sports, but people who talk about it and never play are only living vicariously and projecting their lives onto others and never really accomplish anything. I imagine this group of people would be the type that would actually start their own balanced teams of whatever after finding something everybody could play. After looking around the room, it looked like they actually decided on bowling, and they all went to go bowling. I saw pictures of several bowling teams, so it looks like they had a fairly sizable bowling group. I stood up to look closer, and my muscle memory patted all my pockets and belts for the important bits and confirmed everything was in place. I remember that the local bowling alley that we all used had also got later closed down for basically the same reason as the plant here. The city taxed the alley out of existence in conjunction with minimum wage going up so high that they simply couldn't stay in business anymore. People that couldn't form independent thought would simply say that raising prices was the answer, when in reality everyone that bowled there had lost their jobs. The only people that had been able to go there with any regularity only went to the bar, but with alcohol taxes going through the roof, the margins were basically zero. So how do you pay a bartender? Tips? But everyone wants tips done away with. You can see where I'm going with this. The bowling alley had to close down. That made unemployment go even higher, and the cycle continued. Another pointless discussion to have with people, because even people that agree with what happened can rarely agree on what to do about it. What can you do? Wondering that for the millionth time, I looked up in thought and saw a drop ceiling less than half height of what I remembered the rest of the facility having. Then I realized that I've got to be looking for an upstairs. I headed back out into the hallway, feeling one room closer to finding the main corporate office and hopefully the kitchen break room. On my way out, I found a first floor map and a plastic sleeve up on the wall that they had left behind. I thought it would be helpful, so I grabbed it for reference. I looked at it for a minute, then I folded it up neatly and put it away in a pocket. Chapter 13. Walking the Line. When I walked out of the lunchroom this time, I noticed 7 colored stripes on the floor and looking along the outer walls for some kind of legend. Plastics, papers, batteries, glass, metals, receiving, and lobby. Lobby. Okay, that makes sense. Man, I love office floor management. When it is done right, it is so freaking awesome. So I followed the lobby color. Except, to be honest, I wasn't really sure which color it was since it was dark, and with my flashlight, I couldn't be completely sure what color it really was. So like a kid following a string maze, I focused on making sure I didn't accidentally get screwed up. I stayed on the correct line by walking on the one that looked the most similar to the one that said lobby on the sign. As I got to the intersection where all the lines started splitting off, I subconsciously looked left and right, and sure enough, there were signs everywhere saying to stop. And similar signage that would say to look around and be aware and wear safety vests, etc. That's when I noticed on the walls that there were earplug dispensers. I love those. And the triangle cone hazard dispensers and all kinds of stuff. But no vests. Those probably got doled out at the lobby for visitors. Okay. Before I took the last turn to follow the line to the lobby, I shined my flashlight inward towards the main facility again for reference and repetition. That's when I noticed my flashlight's beam had started to get significantly weaker. I hadn't noticed in the lunchroom because it was smaller in there, but out here I really noticed it with nothing to reflect the light off of. I probably haven't changed the batteries in this thing in like 8 months, so how long have I been out of work? Over a year? 2? So yeah, I have no idea how long it's been since I've changed these batteries. I'm just glad I always spring for lithiums. I need to change these soon. With that, I use what's left of my flashlight's low energy to make my way to the lobby. Chapter 14. The Grand Lobby. Lobbies are usually an interesting creation in office buildings because they need to be open to the public and visitors and still provide some kind of functional security also. As such, I must sheepishly admit they are fairly easy to use to my advantage depending on the situation at the front desk. As a prior security consultant, I always reported my findings to the highest ethical standards, but here I was going through another building like I belonged here, and it was honestly like the building itself had personally invited me, and that's how I always felt in buildings. And no part of the building ever made me feel that way more than the lobby. Open and welcoming were exactly how lobbies were designed to make you feel, so mission successful. This lobby was definitely inviting, more like normal lobbies. It had access to both the offices upstairs as well as the rest of the facility area. This made it the most convenient area and the most comfortable area to wait at. That unfortunately also made it the most vulnerable location in the building, which is because lobbies always face the road in the absolutely most public and vulnerable way possible. I always felt like it was partially to assuage the ego of a building developer, but then partially I feel like it ends up reflecting a lot of the CEOs also. This is why the lobby in a lot of ways reflects the design of the boardroom and the CEO's office. It's like, how much ego can they cram into the building itself and then ignore that the building needs to function in other ways also? Things like being secure and safe and sustainable to maintain seem to fall by the wayside so often. The thing is, a lot of CEOs don't care about most ostentatiously audacious building. Most business owners are actually running small businesses, 500 employees and under. In regards to facilities, the priority is usually a good, functional, sustainable building. They don't want to get taxed to death and not spend over half their fixed overhead on healthcare. Companies like the one I was in right now used to employ most people before things got that way. A funny anecdote I remember is how a lot of companies would buy huge buildings and then immediately have their stocks tanked due to some colossal failure that they were hiding. It had become an inside joke that whenever a company bought a new giant building for themselves, it meant to sell their stocks. Oh, there I go again. I need to get this flashlight's batteries changed out. I wasn't going to risk any more rooms with the beam as weak as it was getting. I wasn't going to risk the battery change anywhere with direct light in sight anywhere near the streets, so I made my way to the lobby's administrative desk. I saw the desk and immediately knew it would be big enough for my task. I got my cell phone out and got it powering up so it would start its boot up routine. I looked around and in every drawer in case there was a standalone light, and unfortunately there were none. It looked like this person had cleaned out their desk as well, which was fine. It was plenty deep as well as high, and I had everything I needed. My phone finished booting up after a few moments, and I immediately checked the battery in time. I saw the temperature readout on my home screen tiles, and it said it was much warmer than it actually was. It probably hasn't updated since yesterday evening sometime, I thought. I debated trying to connect, have it update, and have it tell me when exactly the sunrise was. That would take too much power, though, and who knows if I could even get a strong enough signal for data. I needed a relatively strong signal to pull information like that, so I just guessed. I probably still had well over 2 hours of darkness and around a quarter or less of battery, but again, once it gets below a third, it's anyone's guess as to how much life a phone would have. My phone didn't immediately die at a third battery like most, but it was still questionable duration at this point. I also checked the cell signal, and there was still one tiny bar of cell signal available. Apparently there was a cell tower still fighting to stay alive out there somewhere in the city. I took 3 new AAA batteries out of my pocket and put them up against my phone. I tried to set them in a way to where gravity couldn't pull them down to the floor, then scattered them in 3 different directions. That would cost me any precious time with the light and cold that I couldn't afford, and I realized that I have way too many parts to juggle and deal with gravity. I take the backpack off and set it down to make a nest for everything and agreed to myself that that was a much better idea. I take the batteries out and set them in a new nest I made. I take the phone and set them in a new nest and set them to one side, and I take the phone and lean it up to one side to shine the light on the rest and turn off my flashlight. Another reason I needed the nest is that when I first bought this flashlight, one of the customizations I did is took the horrible clip off. The clip had nearly no retention and was useless. It enjoyed flinging itself off like a lightning bolt under any more than its own weight. So now, being perfectly cylindrical, this flashlight also would have rolled right off the table. Someday I vowed myself to get some shock cord and cinch it up, tie it into a lanyard. Now my flashlight was safely in the nest I made for it. I knew my phone would stay awake for 15 minutes because I'd set it to a 15-minute sleeper timer ages ago for a phone game I had given up on. The final straw in the game was when I finally figured out the scheme and its system between Tier 8 and 9. I was so proud I'd discovered the virtual gate without spending hardly any money, and that was my way of beating free-to-play games. I enjoyed learning their system by spending little to no money. This was a particularly good game, and it broke my heart that there was such an astronomical leap between Tier 8 and 9, and exponentially in 9 and 10. I had done the math, and while I had gotten to Tier 8 with maybe $5 of real money, getting to 9 would have cost something like $200. Getting to 10 would have cost around $500. And hearing chatter back and forth in game between players, people at those high levels that also found a way to cheat in a way they would have never lost battles versus each other. I uninstalled the game that day. It was a bittersweet removal. Anyway, as I thought about that and worked on my project, I knew I was running out of time to swap these batteries out. As if my phone wanted to remind me, it made 3 beep noises quietly to let me know it was running low. I guess I had forgot to turn the volume off, but it was really low, so it ended up being okay. Although in my mind it felt like it echoed off the walls of the buildings, when in reality it was probably only in the cubby of the desk. I turned the volume off, then tapped the menu option and sent the phone into overtime emergency mode. That shut off all the non-essentials to keep the phone running a little longer. This was in order to keep the light on because it was pitch black in here, and trying to switch out 3 AAAs in the dark would risk reversing the leads. That would burn my flashlight out, leaving me in the dark for several hours in 30-degree or so temperatures. Some flashlights had that protection, but mine did not. The phone performed the emergency mode operation dutifully. That actually usually gave me a little bit of power back to the phone and allowed it to go a while longer instead of instantly dying on me. So I moved from the phone to working on the flashlight. In one practiced motion, I undid the top of the flashlight. The core slid out, and I carefully removed it and inspected the batteries for corrosion. There was none, of course, from this brand of batteries. The price I paid for these batteries was so well worth it. The rubber moisture barrier was still in good shape and stayed with the shell like it was designed to. I made a mental note to myself to try to get some additional replacement rubber moisture barriers someday if I could find them. I still don't understand how people can say these types of batteries spontaneously combust anyway. If treated right, they're the best you can get. I snapped one out and set it on one side of the safe circle that I had made. Then I picked one up from the new spot and set it in my flashlight the same way. Rotated and then repeated the last section. Then all 3 had been swapped out. To complete, I checked to make sure they were all nestled in snugly. Usually there was one where the lead didn't match up perfectly. It didn't affect function, but it wouldn't fit in as streamlined as it should. I felt through them and found the right one, and with some pressure it snapped in all the way. With that done, I slid the core in smoothly and twisted the bottom closed. I thanked my phone and then shut it off before it powered itself down. I hated trying to power it up from a full dead battery. If the charger isn't strong enough, even with the phone powered off, it's a real bear to get the charge started. I put the phone in my pocket. The batteries, which were warm, I held for a second and then placed them in a pocket of mine. I tried the flashlight in the palm of my hand as far under the desk as I could, and it was back to full power. It projected a nice, soft, ghostly, matte, pasty glow again. With that, I clicked it back off and tried to think for a second. I wasn't going to find anything in the lobby, most likely, that I was going to be able to use right now. Going around the lobby with my flashlight was sure to attract attention if there was any attention to attract from the road or other businesses. Just in case people were arriving at work this early in the morning, I still had to be careful. I needed to get deeper into the building where I could break line of sight with the road again. This was in order for me to get my flashlight back on and begin to scout. Hopefully I could find the stairs up to the 2nd floor. I thought about the lobby's layout from memory, and then I mentally mapped out in my head where I thought the 3 exits were from where I was. I remembered roughly where the upstairs path was in relation to the way outside. I stood up, swung the backpack around carefully and tightly to not snag anything. Then muscle memory patted all my belt and important pockets and critical bits, and everything was in place. And then there was a slam at the outer heavy doors outside. I froze in place, trying to gather as much information as I could about this noise, first thinking about its distance relative to me. The lobby had a 2-door stage system. The noise was at the outer door. The noise was at the outer doors. The noise was the outer door slamming inwards. So it was the bolt and mechanism slamming into steel. Building pressure? Or would building pressure slam the inner door? I couldn't think very well. I didn't hear anything else outside. Could something heavy have flown and hit it? I still didn't hear any wind, so I stand and wait 5 minutes. Nothing moves, and I started to get really cold, not having moved in a while. No sirens, no cars going by, no people coming to work this early, no nothing. Back to thinking about the doors. The style of doors doesn't really keep the place well pressurized. They don't really keep the climate control either. Something sort of in the middle. Still a heck of a lot better system than those useless turnstile doors, at least, which are beyond a waste. I couldn't wait any longer, and there hadn't been any movement or new noise. I still had at least another hour and a half until daylight, and I was clearly chilled at this point. I'd been standing still for too long trying to wait out the noise situation. It's hard to keep the shivers under control, and each breath, I imagine, was a cloud in front of me. I carefully turn around and blink a few times. I think I can see the outlines, and with my memory carefully scooted my way forward, trying not to bump into anything. I then reached out my hand to touch the wall to steady myself and started to lose my balance in the dark. I walked down the hall an unsure distance, which I was getting used to, and which gradually sloped into a corner that was a dead end. That didn't make sense. I couldn't tell if there was any windows or not. I really didn't want my flashlight to advertise to the world that there was someone in here. I felt around the wall and went from normal to cold still. I had found the elevator. That must mean the stairs were behind me. I turned around, walked a few steps, and bumped into the staircase. I grabbed the railing and kicked around until I found the stairs. Upon finding them, I carefully treaded up the stairs by feel until I got to the office. I turned the flashlight back on at this point, due to being on a second level, but I tried to keep the beam low to the floor. I also tried to cup the light beam so it wouldn't flood the area with light to where people outside would see a reflection. I knew there would still be a chance, but I didn't want to walk into furniture, a potted plant, or off the ledge on accident. My flashlight only had one brightness setting, so I clicked on the light with my beam. I quickly scanned to make sure there were no shin to knee-high coffee tables and no other crazy railings or whatever down to the first floor. I also tried to gauge what the line of sight would be from the second floor to the ground level outside to gauge if I had to worry about using my flashlight from up here. I also tried to gauge the other building's line of sight, but everything outside was pitch darkness. I couldn't see the other buildings out the windows, and I couldn't see the road. I still realized the glow would be noticed by passersby as it reflected off everything. However, there were no people on the roads. It was quiet, so I thought maybe I'd be able to hear them in time and shut my light off, so I figured I was okay, as long as I didn't shine the flashlight above chest height. I kept the light low and cupped to not reflect off the ceiling. With that, I proceeded to try to keep me, my knees, and shins safe. Then I realized there was another gated pull-down fence in my way covering the entrance into the actual offices. I turned and looked to see a tiny table, chair, and phone, and turned back and there was still a gated fence. The fence had not been an illusion, unfortunately. Here's the funny thing, though, and you aren't going to believe me. There were 6 latches into the floor, which made this extra secure. I didn't think that in and of itself was strange, but the fact that there was no singular mechanism to open it. Instead of one mechanism like you would expect, above each latch was about 4 feet up a keyhole with a different little icon. A piece of plastic wrap, a plastic bottle, a piece of diamond-plated steel, a battery, a cardboard box, and then a pair of glasses. So, yeah. Why am I seriously not surprised? I thought to myself. I looked out towards the window, and there isn't even a hint of dawn yet. There's still 2 more hours. Are you kidding me? I mashed my face up to the fencing for a second to look through, which was sort of dumb because it was very cold and the fence smacked my glasses onto my face, which hurt. On the other side of the fence, there appeared to be another pressure plate similar to the one downstairs. This pressure plate was slightly different, though, and is about 6 inches by 6 inches and was clearly weight-based. Something very heavy would have to mash it down with force springs to push prongs backwards and the latches to go into, I guess. There was no way that was happening from here. I needed to find 6 keys. Chapter 16. Backtracking to the main metric board. As I gingerly made my way down the stairs with my light now off again, walking by memory, I thought some more. I remember thinking to myself that these people obviously all had shared love for a favorite video game of mine where the corporation had absurdly complex key systems to get into buildings and rooms. It made me chuckle again inside, though, because I imagined that sort of unified balance in place where the blue collars would come upstairs to unlock the white collars' office every morning. Was that for real, I wondered? Like a symbolic check and balance system, sort of, like mutual respect? As I crossed through the lobby out into the main facility, I imagined the white collars settling in upstairs checking emails as the blue collars put their lunches away, then they would go say good morning and do their morning pre-checks on all the machines. Then I thought about the supervisors checking all their emails to grab the reports in preparation for the morning huddles with their teams. Finally, they would report back to where I was now at the main metric board. The blue collars would meet with management from both sides of the business to clear any roadblocks getting in the way of meeting the day's respective goals. I clicked on my flashlight, now deep inside the warehouse again, where nobody could see. To match my thoughts, there I was back outside the receiving office and lunchroom area, basically where I had started. I was next to the management metric board. I looked on the walls for a legend to decide which line was which painted on the floor. It was at this point I decided plastics would be first. Hopefully, I could get 2 keys knocked out at once. With the shivers completely out of my control and coming on every 30 seconds or so and seeing my breath in front of my face, I followed the painted lines on the floor to plastics. Chapter 17. Plastics. The line I followed led me directly to 2 parallel lines that looked almost identical in nature. I didn't know most of what I was looking at, except one line looked maybe like it had some giant blender things. It sort of looked like a giant cotton candy mixer or something else, I don't know. That must be the soft plastics line, I thought to myself. Everything else here was clean too, just like the fridges that they cleaned before they left. I wonder if they were planning on coming back, as if this was only a temporary measure, or maybe it was just that they had that much pride in their work and that much respect for the machinery and appreciation for the company that they worked for. Could they have kept it this clean every day? I got to the end of the line and started searching around for the keys I needed to get through the upstairs gate. I also was keeping my eyes out for any other materials that would be helpful for me lasting the last few hours of night and getting my core temperature back up. The first thing I noticed is that the workstation still had a tiny bit of power to it, almost like it had residual power, like it was its own power source. I noticed this because the few of the lights still seemed to be on, or maybe it was only my light reflecting and I had started to have visual hallucinations. I wasn't sure anymore. But my mind started to wonder, what if this building got power from the recycling it had performed somehow? Had they rigged these systems to somehow actually get a little bit of energy back from the work they did and keep some in a battery to power some of their systems? Give me a break. That would be amazing if that was the case. I guess that explains part of what the metrics meant that I glossed over earlier. I looked around their kiosks some more at the different knobs and toggles and saw a lockbox with a logo of a piece of plastic wrap. There was no button to pop it open though. There was a light diode next to it, but it was dark and the mechanism was not opening up in its current state. No secret levers or buttons underneath, and the shivers were getting more frequent by the minute. This searching thing wasn't going to work if I'm a popsicle, and my brain isn't going to be working well much longer either, so yeah. I give myself a big hug and start shuffling my jacket around, trying to generate some kind of frictional heat or something. With that motion, I heard a plastic bag shuffling around. I thought to where the sound was coming from, and then I remembered I had put a plastic bag in my pocket earlier when my cat wouldn't stop playing with it. It was the sound that had woken me up. What would be more poetic than actually being able to put one of these divisive, but with any creativity whatsoever, you can't find more uses for, multi-use bags back into a recycling machine to myself before I freeze to death? I don't know. I can't think of anything more cool than that for some reason, so anyway, I looked for the receptacle area and tried to crumple it up as best as I can. Then I throw it down the chute as far as it can go, and then I stood back to think some more. As I imagined the plastic wrap unwrapping inside to visit where so many of its plastic wrapping brothers and sisters had begun to meet their rebirth, I thought about how many times it had probably been re-been. Then I started getting a look around for other options and spotted the shop floor office. I would check there last before finally giving up, since there would be no place left to check. I shuffled to the sides a little bit to get a better look at the other lanes, but realized I could only see what the other plastics lane looked like with my flashlight. The other lanes were too far away for my flashlight to reach. It was at this point that the machine I was at started a very gentle and low power function. It was very weak, subtle, and brief, but in the silence over the warehouse I definitely heard it clearly. I looked over to the kiosk, then the receptacle, to recognize that the plastic bag was gone. This was very disorienting. I blinked a few times, shined my flashlight down the chute all around, trying not to drop my flashlight in, and no luck. I shut my flashlight off and brought it safely away from the chute to think in the dark for a minute, hoping that would help. It was when the flashlight pointed away from the kiosk, I noticed there was an extremely dim green light where there had apparently been no light emitting before. I clicked my flashlight back on to see what was adjacent to that green light, and it was the lockbox. I tried to discern which way the hinges would have been, and finally figured out that it swung out to the left. Inside, sure enough, was a key. It was a normal enough looking key on a keyring with a little floater with the image of a plastic bag on it. Perfect. One down, 5 to go. Hard plastics being right next to it, I pulled off the hard plastic bottle cap from my water bladder that I took out of my pocket for the occasion. It came off with a snap, and then I proceeded to pull all the other ones off too for good measure, since they were small. The caps were there simply to keep crud off the snap tops, so they weren't too critical to hold on to. After that, I rolled the caps down the chute. They bounced lightly and easily down the chute to where they needed to go. I shut my flashlight off and waited as I eyeballed the shop floor office from where I was. It took a minute or so, and the shivering was getting increasingly more frequent. Soon a little light popped on next to the respective lockbox. I turned my flashlight back on and got a second key with my cold fingers. There was a water bottle on the logo on the floater. Hooray! I was close enough to the shop floor office now to decide that that's where I needed to go next. Then I would head to the next line, or whatever it was. I can't see it from here. Chapter 18. Shop floor office. With 2 keys happily in my pocket and 4 more to go, I decided to check out the office they have on the shop floor. This also seemed like a good place to get another energy bar down, so I opened one up and shoved half in my mouth and started checking out the office. These offices are always different from normal offices, but also familiar in a comforting way. They usually have older computers complete with monitors that give you killer migraines and, of course, the horrible chairs. They usually still resemble offices, just much older offices that nobody would actually tolerate anymore if they had a choice, or a voice. This one was refreshingly different, though. They had modern monitors, first of all, which is probably the first time I'd ever seen modern monitors that were actually decent sized in a shop office. The next thing I noticed is that they didn't have horribly uncomfortable chairs. I got my water back out and took a drink out of my hand. This was to make sure I was getting my pretend meal down properly, then put my water away. As a matter of observation, the office didn't have chairs at all. On the floor under each desk there were thick rubber shock-proof mats, and the tables were designed to be adjustable. Those mats cost a decent amount of money. Someone spent a sizable portion making sure these people didn't have to mess with back pain and not liking the height of their table. There were 6 supervisor desks, but they weren't closed-off hardware offices. They were instead completely open and accessible to the rest of the office. I guess they took the open door policy thing here seriously. It looked like there were 2 conference rooms off to the side if topics ever had to be private. I remember seeing the bathrooms the next doors down. I didn't need to go, and I can't imagine anything being in there, and yeah, no thanks in clearing tons of random abandoned bathrooms and stalls. I'll pass. Once I was sure the first half of my energy bar was down, I ate the second half, crumpled up the wrapper, and stuffed it in a pocket. So anyway, I'm checking on things like coat racks and actually found a heavy coat finally. It was a size larger and fit right over my thermal hoodie. Maybe it was sentimental or something, and they felt like they would be honoring the place by leaving it here. It was a huge coat with deep pockets, and I took my plastic Kevlar gloves out of the pockets I had them in and put them in these new pockets. The gloves fit in these pockets a lot better. I also took the energy drink can out of its prior pocket and put it in the new pocket as well, so the jacket would fit flush. And now it did. I zipped up my thermal hoodie, then zipped up the new heavier jacket, then I snapped it on top of that. I finally felt like I might get warmer. I took the final drink of my first water bladder and crumpled it up, then I put it back in its pocket in my cargo pants. I think I had 2 left. That isn't a lot, but enough for the night. With the new heavier coat on for a minute now, I could feel my core temperature rising already. It was slow, mind you, since I'd already lost so much heat, but I could feel the shivers wanting to stop. This wouldn't be enough, since I was losing a lot of heat out of my legs also, but it would definitely keep me going for a while longer. I remembered to check underneath all the desks. Underneath each was an electric heater. I guess that makes sense with all these fancy desks. They had cabinets, though, and I remembered to check the cabinets. Thankfully, I found something I could not believe. They had a propane space heater with a hose going to nothing. That must have been what they used to heat this place in the wintertime to help compensate. I read over it to try to familiarize myself with the features it had. It had a carbon monoxide sensor, knockover sensors, and all the other kinds of functions. Man, these people thought of everything for their employees. It weighed almost nothing, but there was no propane anywhere. Someone must have taken the propane home. That made sense, I guess. Who would want to leave a giant propane tank laying around when it could actually go to use somewhere? They probably used it for their final barbecue or something that I imagined them having. I picked up the heater and moved out of the office to figure out what product the next in line had serviced. Chapter 9. Metals. I walked for a ways, clearly warming up and feeling a little bit better. I shined my light around, trying to get an idea of which production line I was coming up to, and decided to look up. I figured they probably had the signs above, since they had so many other advanced continual improvement measures. Sure enough, there was a sign above that said metal. The font was in letters in a style that wouldn't look out of place on a popular band with a similar name. I sat the heater down and started to look around. The station had a significantly more industrial and heavy-duty feel to it, and I felt like more had been put into making sure it could handle the increased weights and pressures. I thought about the puzzle for a second and reached into my pocket. I pulled out the aluminum can. I inspected the empty energy drink can first. I did my best to carefully and quietly unpop the crinkled and crumpled spots so that it could roll down as I intended. The final uncrinkled pop was the biggest and was very loud. The sound echoed across the entire facility. Right after that, a secondary noise of thin bent metal unflexing that I did not make echoed back in my direction. Swell, I remembered thinking, but probably ended up saying out loud on accident. I probably also heard swell back, but then I couldn't figure out if that was just hearing me saying swell after so much quiet. I don't know which, or if the cold temperature had gotten into my brain to the point to where I didn't recognize my own voice anymore. So to be honest, if it didn't sound like it was coming at me, I was just going to ignore it at this point. I chuckled under my breath nervously. I was tired of the noises throughout the night. I resolved that I'm just going to act like I belonged here at this point. I carefully positioned the can on the receptacle and let it go straight. The can rolled down into the receiving area to wait for the process to begin. I looked around while I waited to see what there is to see while the respective system processed. I noticed some canisters over on some shelves. I walked over to the shelves and shined a light on the sign to see what it said, which was non-conforming materials. These must be the things that would be too dangerous to go into the system, I thought to myself. I proceeded to look through the shelves out of curiosity. Most of them were simply objects that must have been materials or alloys that the machine couldn't digest. But on a different shelf was nothing but different canisters and cylinders. I could not believe what I was seeing. I carefully and quietly sorted through the various cylindrical objects looking for ones familiar to me and I ended up with a total of 3 that appeared to be propane tanks. They were the small camping ones that were semi-portable and about football-sized. Upon picking them up, one seemed completely full. There was another one that was maybe a third full and one completely empty. I took the 2 hopeful ones, and they were the perfect size to fit in my backpack. I put them in, and they fit snugly, but I was able to zip up the pack and carefully put it on. My coat insulated me from the cold chill of the canisters. I went back to check the workstation, and sure enough, the key was ready to get picked up. Hooray! I grabbed the key and looked at it. The floater on the keyring had a piece of diamond-cut steel in the shape of an M. Very cool. I happily put the key in my pocket, felt for the other 2 in my pocket, and confirmed they were there. Now 3 total. After that, I moved to the next line, which I assumed was going to be the paper area, and hopefully not the glass area. I didn't particularly like glass, as it was sharp, unpredictable, and loud. So I hope to save that line for a little longer. Chapter 20. Paper Products. I picked up my heater and walked for a ways, thinking about the 2 new containers that would be its new best friend in my pack. I walked towards the massive paper production operation. It smelled a little like wet bleached paper still, but not completely inoffensive to my sense of smell. I got to the operations unit and set my heater down to prepare for the new puzzle. I had this one planned out already and took out the cardboard package from that my energy bars came from earlier. I took the package and flattened the box, which made it sort of a disc so it would fly straight as possible. I looked to make sure the consoles were the same, and they were. I went to the receptacle and waited between shivers, which had mostly subsided. Then I flicked my improvised cardboard disc into the receptacle, right where the past objects had ended up, and turned around to wait. As I was waiting for the system to process, I knew there was an inevitable problem coming up that I needed to resolve. I hadn't seen any glass products anywhere lately, and none at all since I'd been here that I can recall. Everything public-facing was safety plastic, and the mugs in the lunchroom would have been ceramic, not glass. People usually don't keep glass office equipment at their desks, like for pen containers, because it's honestly just too dangerous. It was out of fashion a long time ago anyway. Even eyeglasses, as much of a pun as the word was, because it had the word glass, are usually some kind of composite plastic. I had no idea how I was going to find glass for the glass line. So I thought of this absolutely stupid way of finding glass. The plan was that I would switch to laser mode on my flashlight and shine the laser around and see if it would refract. If it did, maybe I found glass. Who knows? I leaned up against the machine while it figures out the cardboard and started shining the laser around the warehouse. The laser could project further than the flashlight and could reach 250 yards or maybe even further. More than enough to reach anywhere in the warehouse. I had no idea what I was doing and just started shining the laser around. I shined to the left and I shined to the right, and I write my name on the wall and start drawing pictures and completely forget what I was doing. Then I remembered and started shining it around strategically again. Finally, I was tracing it along the wall and saw it skip over a spot. Then the laser appeared to move on its own and disappear and reappear. I switched back to flashlight mode and saw that a door was opening on its own, and then a loud crashing noise came from the room behind the door. Chapter 21. Maintenance Closet. This room was about 20 yards away, and the crashing had stopped. In deciding to act like I was supposed to be there, I finally decided to authoritatively start acting like it. I drew my sidearm in fluid motion, using my flashlight hand to pinch up the coat enough to clear my sidearm. I kept full trigger discipline with pointing my pointer finger forward, keeping my sidearm close and resting on my offhand, which was holding my flashlight. My pointer finger on my offhand pointed forwards towards the temporary commotion. I sidestepped to get line of sight with the closet and explained calmly but firmly to the closet that I was officially security here. Furthermore, whoever or whatever that was in that closet needed to announce itself, its intentions, and then come out slowly, hands first. After a few seconds of rustling, I saw about a foot off the ground a pair of refracting glowing eyes. I moved the flashlight slightly as to not shine the light directly in the cat's eyes, as well as to not be pointing my firearm directly at, and then recognized a familiar monster cat. It was looking back at me as if to say, "Hi, monkey. I certainly didn't come from there and didn't do anything I should be embarrassed about. I would appreciate it if you didn't look at me like that." Then it started preening itself, putting its rustled fur back into place from having to scramble out of the closet so quickly. It had apparently chased the laser into the closet. Go figure. I carefully walked up to the closet anyway and tapped the closet door open with the rest of the way gently with my foot. Then I cleared it with as much of an angle as I could, and there wasn't any space for someone to be in there. There appeared to be what was some knocked down brooms. I backed up, reassessed the situation around me. Still nothing around, so I reholstered my sidearm into its hidden area. I squatted down and gave the cat a pat to let it know that I wasn't mad, and agreed with it that it definitely wasn't the cat that knocked all that stuff over. The cat appreciated the vote of confidence, and all was forgotten. I then proceeded to check the supply closet for hopefully useful items. The only thing I saw in there resembling glass was some different sized light bulbs. I absolutely hated the old light bulbs and didn't even like touching them. Those bulbs were still relatively safely in the cardboard containers, sort of like eggs in a carton. I grabbed the smallest ones I could find for portability, and because these were a resource that someone had paid for. I didn't mind as much though, because they were probably switching or midway in process of transitioning to LEDs anyway to further save energy. I had noticed mixed lighting solutions throughout the building. The old lighting technologies gave a lot of people, including me, horrible headaches, chronic fatigue, just like old monitors, and wasted absurd amounts of electricity, among other issues. Life sure was better back in the old days of just working from dawn to dusk. However, these days, implemented properly with smart sensors by a trained implementation and consulting team, LEDs and Lux lighting were very healthy and helped people's moods too. The positive moods were doubly important here in the Pacific Northwest. I looked around for a second, and sure enough, there were several stacks of the newer lighting waiting to be installed. I smelled to myself and tucked the mops and other items that had spilled out back into the closet and made sure it shut tight and latched. I shrugged to myself that I must have been looking at the product lines and missed the tiny detail of this door being open. I promised myself I'd be more careful in the future. I took the pair of old light bulbs I'd found with me back to the paper product station to start the key process and receive the key. The paper products key was ready to go, so I grabbed it. The floater on the key ring looked like a cardboard box. That was pretty cool, I remember thinking. I put it in my pocket and felt for the prior keys. There were now 4 in total. Good. I picked up my heater and monster cat, and with my backpack on, I headed to the second to last station, which was probably going to be glass. Chapter 22, Glass Line. It took a while to get away from the large paper line, but as soon as I did, I could see the glass line. It looked similar to the hard plastic line, except heavier built, sort of like the metal line. I took the heater and set it down. The monster cat, realizing we were at a temporary destination, decided to go patrol. I confirmed the station had the same lockbox and went to the receptacle that was light bulb sized. I inserted both light bulbs just to make sure, and then I pretended to wink at the machines, as if the machine knew it was ridding the world of something legitimately horrible. My brain seemed to agree for a second by giving me a single throb of pain. Thanks, brain. That hand with the phantom throb had actually been cut by metal working on a computer, but I had sliced the tip of my thumb off being an idiot. I was trying to demonstrate why glass was dangerous to some kids, and well, it backfired. I stayed the hell away from glass ever since then whenever possible. It seemed so unpredictable and like it hated me. I also dropped a lot of glass in the past and hated cleaning it up. Sometimes glass would just randomly shatter even though it was supposed to be tempered properly. I really hated glass. I folded the light bulb carton up and stuck it in a pocket and looked around to wait for the machine to process the stupid glass. The shivers had nearly gone by this point, but I was still very cold due to so much of the heat leaving through my khaki cargo pants. They didn't hold in warmth as much as jeans did, but I never had money for the hybrid super cool tactical khakis that were actually as warm but still breathable somehow as both, and Yada yada yada. Those pants were so expensive, but oh so awesome. And I always wanted the knee pad inserts in them too, because my knees had always hurt so bad since going up these awkward height stairs once when I was like 19. Such a stupid time in my life where my knees didn't go out, and I'd even been in pretty good shape, but whatever, who cares? My knees never recovered after that anyway. I could start to see the windows fairly close from here. I clicked my flashlight off to get contrast, and I adjusted my glasses to look at an upward angle towards the windows to see if I could try to see some hints of a sunrise at all. Maybe it was my imagination, but instead of it being mostly pitch black in second-story windows, it did almost start to look like a dawn's extremely dark navy blue beginning. Maybe another hour or two before full sunlight. I still needed to warm up, so I was sticking to this plan. Plus, whatever was going on out there, I didn't want to simply automatically rush outside until I gathered enough intel on what was going on. It wasn't like I was going to be able to run and shoot my way through like 6 blocks, plus 2 blocks, plus my entire subdivision if people decided overnight to immediately go bonkers. I didn't have nearly enough ammo. I wasn't going to risk it. If you were safe, you shelter in place. You hold position in case others are coming that are the good guys. That's always rule number 1. I noticed out of my peripheral that only barely a light had turned from off to green. I clicked my flashlight back on and got the key out of the lockbox. It had a little floater on the keyring that was a pair of glasses. Very cool. I put it in my pocket and felt around and counted 5 total keys in there now. I spoke in a low but calm voice aloud to Patrolling Kitty that I was moving on to the next objective. Then I got my heater and headed towards the battery line. 1 to go. Chapter 23. Battery line. It wasn't very far from the glass line to the battery line. I had this one planned out as I had for most of the other challenges. I had the batteries I had swapped up from my flashlight from earlier. I set the heater down and noticed Monster Cat had been behind me. My cat companion realized we were at a stopping point and began to check the perimeter again. I checked the console and everything seemed to be normal. I went to the receptacle to put in the batteries. It had all different kinds of receptacles, and this place was quite different from all the others. It looked like it had been engineered to be more hazmat industrialified, if that makes sense. I imagine lots of bright yellow colors and everything being anti-corrosive and rubber and awesome and goggles and aprons. Sure enough, as soon as I noticed, there were about 50 safety signs everywhere and about those exact topics. There were a lot of references to OSHA and a special rising sink and special rinsing apparatus. There was also a whole library of manuals about pretty much everything you could imagine regarding MSDS, such as material safety data sheets. Instead of traditional books, they were basically entire binders of every topic, organized and very efficient. I stopped checking out the library and refocused on all the different bits and parts on the machine and tried to find something that looked like Li-ion for lithium-ion. That's the type of battery's full name, I think, I'm pretty sure. I eventually found a receptacle for that specific type of battery and inserted the batteries. After that, I went to the station to wait. I got back to the station, then I was going to check out the awesome library I spotted when I noticed a radio at the station. I guess someone at the station hadn't come to get the radio. Upon closer look, I noticed this was also a company radio, I guess. Well, it was branded with the company's logo anyway. I wonder if the radio had been made with some recycled materials as part of a promo or something. It looked like an upgraded radio, though, not just an AM/FM. I decided to take the radio with me. I looked up at the radio up close for a second, and I was curious. Upon closer inspection of its functions, it looked like it had some extra channels and a crank, and a solar panel. I was simply amazed at all the gadgets it had. I decided that I'd check it out later when I'm not freezing. Out of my peripheral, I noticed that I was correct about the battery return location. The faintest of green was lit upon the console, so the process had worked. I grabbed the sixth and final key. It had a floater on the keyring, which was a battery icon. Very neat. I added the battery key to my pocket of 5 other keys and was very happy at my accomplishment. I grabbed the upgraded radio and went to grab the heater and realized I had run out of hands. I set the radio back down. I searched it for a possible strap that it might have. I found a strap indeed and unfurled the strap. I looped it around my neck and under an arm. Then I picked up the heater and notified the cat that I was moving to the next objective, after which I started looking on the ground for the painted lines. Chapter 24. Back to the main office. I moved down the battery processing line a little bit in between it and the glass processing line. Before too long, I found painted on the concrete a line on the floor for me to follow. I did this instead of following the outer wall because the outer wall had machinery parked and I would have taken me twice as long to traverse. It also would have actually been quite dangerous for my legs and even potentially my head in the dark. I could have gotten a cut on my leg or bunked my head. I hadn't even seen a single first aid kit yet. I guess they must have removed all the first aid kits when they left. I realized that I hadn't seen any defib machines either. That service was probably leased by some company that came and picked up the items as part of the contract. That would be an awful situation if I got hurt by something so stupid. I always imagine what would kill off the majority of bad guys in civil unrest would be that nobody would take care of their wounds properly. I'm not a bad guy, and whether or not this is a civil unrest situation, there's nobody around to take care of my wounds, if I were to get any. I'm hoping that nearly everything I need is behind that gate up in the office. It has an extra layer of security, and this is the safest route to get there. It's maybe about a 20-minute walk? I have no idea because it's dark and I'm cold. I'll cover the flashlight for a second and try to look out the windows to get a sense of time in relation to the dawn coming. Maybe it's slightly-ish less of an inky black and more of a severely dark navy blue out there, but I can't tell. Time passes so extremely weird at night in the winter months. You'd swear that night is like 20 hours long when you can't sleep and it's cold, waiting for the sun to come up, but at least I'm not wet. Anyway, the painted lines start to converge as I walk for a while, and I stop to look around as a matter of habit. It is to make sure no speeding work carts are going to cream me. I've had some bad experience with some places that think it's funny to terrorize each other when they never have a chance to change the number past 0 on days since last accident board. Talk about horrible, freaking ridiculous. Anyway, nobody's coming, no noises, no sirens, no cars coming to work, nothing. I get right to before the lobby and check for Monster Cat. Monster Cat is still with me. I have a talk with him really quick. I let him know it's perfectly okay for him to come with me. We're going to sleep up there, and it's going to be warm and safe. He looks at me like this is not news to him, so that's good, I guess. With that, I shut the flashlight off, pass through the lobby by memory as fast as I can. I'm also going as careful as I can, up the stairs again by memory, and as soon I'm back in the upstairs mini lobby where I may crack my shins if I'm not careful. I turn my flashlight on and try to cover the top of the flashlight as best I can. I'm greeted by a big metal fence. Hello, big metal fence. Guess what? I have a present for you. Actually, I have 6 presents. I chuckled to myself. And the cat meowed. I guess I had said that out loud. Or the cat could read my mind. No clue which. I set my heater down and took the keys out and one by one unlocked each of the 6 locks. So first, I did the piece of plastic wrap key into its lock. Turning the key allowed for a bolt to be moved. Then a knob needed to be turned, which would undo the latch at the bottom. I did that, then repeated the process with the soft plastic bottle into its lock, and then the piece of diamond-plated steel M into its lock. Next was the battery key into its lock, the cardboard box key into its lock, And lastly, at the end was a pair of glasses, so I put that key into its lock. As I'm done with each lock and key, I take the keys and spool their rings into each other to make sure that they can't get separated. I noticed the locks were out of order, with the lines down on the shop floor. I imagine at some point that they had decided it was more practical to have the lines in this new order on the shop floor, but remaining preferred the locks in the original order for tradition. I guess it reminded them of the old ways and how things used to be, to remember where they came from. Without giving it much of a further thought, I gave the gate a lift, grabbed the heater, and waited for Kitty. Then I went inside and shut the gate behind me. What, are you crazy? I'm not leaving that gate up, and the cat didn't seem to mind at all. That probably meant the cat had another way around. I'll remember to check the perimeter with the cat soon, just to make sure. And the cat's gone. He's probably already checking it. I noticed on the inside of this new area there was another map on the wall. It was a map of the second floor in a plastic sleeve up on the wall. They must have left it behind for the next people visiting, I guess. I thought it would be helpful, so I grabbed it for reference. I looked at it for a minute, and then I folded it up neatly and put it away in a pocket with his friend. Chapter 25. The Main Office. The entirety of the office wasn't huge. It was maybe only twice the size as the one downstairs. It had variable height desks also. Variable height desks also? It had some kind of heighted desks. But it had chairs tucked underneath them and small rubber mats. I saw the freight elevator first, and the power was still off, obviously. I got the maps out and folded the two over each other and saw that the freight elevator would have been to the left out of the lunchroom downstairs. Without power, it was an opening. I imagined it would need a keycard access to open up even if the power was on, so I wasn't worried about someone getting up there to cause problems anyway. I looked first for a conference room or other hard wall office that looked comfortable and the right size for me and the heater. It might be a little more defensible also. I eventually found an internal hard wall office that looked like it belonged to an executive. I went inside the office. It had a solid real wood desk on one side and then a 4-person table on the other side. This was so they could have conferences in their office without having to schedule a room and thus disrupt everybody else. I set the heater on the floor for later, and then I took up the conference phone off the table and set the radio up there for later. I took the 2 propane cans out of my pack and set them next to the heater, and then I found an empty garbage can and emptied my pockets of everything that didn't seem recyclable and put the garbage can back. I grabbed the blue recycle bin and put everything in it that it would have been recyclable again at some point. Then I took out my second to last packet of water and drank nearly all of it. I realized I had gone a lot longer without water than I should have. Whoops. That made me also realize that I hadn't gone to the bathroom in a while, which really wasn't a healthy thing. I pushed that thought out of my mind that I only basically had one water packet left and was really starting to dehydrate. To stay here for any amount of time, I really needed a significant amount of water. With that, I set out for more supplies. As I walked out of the office, I reminded myself the loose shopping list that I still needed. I was looking for real food, or at least real air food, hopefully from a vending machine, more water, tinfoil, or blankets. There were also a few things I couldn't even wish for, but needed to keep my eyes open for anyway. I methodically went from cube to cube, checking every drawer and overhead bin, looking for anything useful. I eventually found a USB cable that fit my phone. Thankfully, my phone took a universal USB cable and not something ridiculously proprietary. I tucked the cord away, not really knowing how I was going to be able to use it yet, but at least I had it, I guess. This was the problem. Everything was getting pretty much gutted. People were going to take the things they brought with them back home again. When I was done going through the cubes, I tried to find a coat rack to see if there was always like that one abandoned coat. Every office I'd ever been to seemed to have 1 or 2 or 3 in the office. This place was no exception. It was too small to wear, too small to cover up my legs. I imagined I was going to be rolling it up into a ball and using it for a pillow. It didn't have smell or bugs, which was nice also. It wasn't comfortable or soft, but better than nothing. I was done with the cubes and coat racks, so I checked the conference rooms more closely. I remember seeing some odds and ends in them. I found a cardboard trifold that someone had used for a presentation many moons ago. I brought that back into the office I was borrowing and set it next to the recycle bin. I had a special plan for the cardboard presentation. The idea I had in mind meant I would also need a stapler or some tape, or both ideally. I checked all the steel drawers in the hallway until eventually I found an office supply cabinet and got some tape and staples. I wasn't sure which I was going to use yet or exactly how to put the project together, so I grabbed both. I checked the other drawers and eventually found a stack of blankets. Yes, a stack of blankets. There was an envelope set deliberately on top. I picked up both and brought them to the office and set them down carefully on the desk. I was completely bewildered by there being a big stack of blankets and a note. I debated opening the envelope right there, but knew I had to get a few more things first. I went to check the kitchen finally, and thank goodness I found plenty of tinfoil basically right away in a drawer. The vending machine was not only there, but unlocked. I guess this place had management simply pay for the employees' vending machine privileges or something, which is amazing. I grabbed 3 beef jerky packages and a few bags of almonds and put them in my backpack. I checked some other drawers to find the kitchen had like 50 cases of water in there, and a case of each kind of canned fruit with peel top lids. I grabbed 3 bottles of water and a can of peaches, and dropped everything back off in the new nest I was making. As much as it pained me, and as warm as my core was getting, I couldn't quite relax yet. I rubbed my legs to try to warm them up as my legs were freezing. They were essentially numb to the touch at this point. I wiggled my toes, and they were still there through the wool hybrid socks I love to wear. My feet had been off the floor all this time through really thick hiking boots, right? But still, brr. I looked down. Nope, these were my walking slippers, and I wasn't wearing socks. My toes were numb, and I couldn't feel them. Stupid toes. I really needed to rest my body to warm up my toes and legs. I reminded myself again that I couldn't rest yet. I wasn't feeling the fatigue due to eating, but I'm sure it would catch up to me soon. I needed to do a perimeter sweep of whatever was up here, or it was going to really upset me and make resting and relaxing an issue. Clearly the second floor was definitely needed. No, clearing the second floor was definitely needed to give me peace of mind. Walking around specifically to check the perimeter first, there was a server room in the back that there was no way I was getting into. This was unless I knew another code or had a badge and there was no power. There was an emergency fire exit to the ground floor that I had found. The door was alarmed and probably connected directly back to a bell in the alarm system if it was powered, but useless now. That was it. I was secure up here. Actually, it wasn't secure yet, I begrudgingly recalled. I had skipped the bathrooms, probably on purpose too, without realizing it. Swell, I thought to myself. This was always the part of the movie where the horrible stuff was. I was probably going to open a stall door and there'd be someone hanging from a noose or a monster come up from the toilet or down from the vents. I steeled myself with the old phrase I repeated whenever I was worried about opening the shower curtains, or if I turned too fast and realized something horrible could be there. I fear no evil, I said to myself. Suddenly the fear was gone, and I knew nothing would be there. I checked each restroom, both having subtle gender nuances, the women's, for example, not having any urinals, just stalls. It hadn't been weird being in a women's restroom. I used to get called in all the time at an old job to plunge the toilet. It saved us a fortune on calling someone to come professionally perform the service. They knew they could call on me anytime, and I would happily do it, no matter how bad. Even if there was an inch of standing water, the girls there didn't mind. I was actually heralded as their hero. So I cleared both of the rooms and shined my flashlight in and just tapped on the stall doors open with my foot. No ghosts leapt out at me, thankfully, and it only took a few minutes to finish my search. In fact, it seemed peaceful. The office seemed very at peace, which put me at ease. I felt much better knowing the upstairs was secured. With that, I went back to my nest I was working on in the hard-walled inner office. Chapter 26, The Nest. The first thing I did when I got back to the nest I was working on in the inner office was close all but like 16 inches of the door. Then I took the abandoned small jacket I found and stuffed it half under the door. I wouldn't be able to use it as my pillow anymore, but this seemed more important. I carefully placed the jacket half in the door jamb and half under the door to make sure it couldn't open or close. Actually, with this, the door couldn't do either very fast anymore, or well at all. I'd have to find something else for the pillow. In fact, I would probably use the backpack if I could find something soft to stuff in it. I'd work on that last. Oh well, keeping the door this way was important to my overall survival plan. Hopefully, that would make sure it couldn't get shut at all, leaving at least an inch or two gap if the jacket was robust enough and it'd rebound open back up a little bit. Bah! I tested a little bit and it seemed okay. It also made a little shuffling noise if it moved at all. The shuffling could wake me up if something wrestles the door trying to close me in. Next, I respectfully took off all the artwork, metrics, and the rest from the trifold presentation. Then I put it all in an empty envelope I found on the desk, then in a drawer. Then I unrolled the tinfoil off bit by bit into strips and carefully covered the cardboard shiny side pointing out. After that, I carefully folded some extra metal material over the edges, then I folded some of the extra material over itself and then stapled it into the cardboard carefully. The stapler was fairly quiet, as it was a high-end stapler. No cheap staplers for this place. As long as nothing tugged on the tinfoil too much, it wouldn't rip at all, hopefully. On the backside, it was perfectly okay to tape it because the heat was going to be completely reflected away. This would protect the tape, so I used as much as I needed on the back as extra reinforcement. In a little time, I had sort of a directional heat shield project completed. My plan was to put the heater outside the doorway, like 6 inches, and the heat shield past that. That would direct the heat in here, hopefully. I started with the half canister. I connected the hose to the propane tank and then propped the shield against something. The heat shield was maybe 3 feet tall and 5 feet wide, so it was pretty big. I left plenty of room between the shield heater and doorway. This was so if the cat decided to come back from whatever it was doing, it could do so without getting microwaved. This maneuver also helped so I could actually get to the heater without getting fried also. Taking those distances into consideration, I offset the improvised heat shield to one side. Yeah. The heater has a carbon monoxide sensor also, but regardless, the airflow from the unit is going up into the other room. That way, there's no way for enough gas to fill this place and hurt the cat and I. So I'm fine with that setup. I thought for a second about setting off the carbon monoxide sensors, but I looked up and saw no blinking lights. If this building was set up for carbon monoxide, these sensors didn't have battery backup or completely unpowered. I made sure the heat knob was turned to medium, which is the range this one says it wants to be for starting. I turned the knob to let gas in and heard the gas start flowing. Then I flicked the starter knob and the heater gently started up on the first try. I tweaked the temperature up just slightly, so it would be on the higher end of medium. These only ever need to be on high, but it's dipping like 20s and down, and I still think it's like mid-30s right now. In a few hours when the sun comes up, the temperature should rise into the 40s, so upper medium will be fine until I get back up to adjust it. Alright, what else is there? The blankets, the radio, the food, the water. I took everything remaining off the table in the cozy inner office and set it on the floor. Then I spread everything out within reach of my bed I was making, including the card I found in the blankets. I took half the blankets and folded them up under me. I was trying my best to make as much insulation and cushion as possible, but adhering to the footprint I'm going to take up. I took the other blanket and folded them around my legs like a taco, or like a burrito, I'm not sure which it was more similar to, because at this point I'm pretty much ready to pass out from exhaustion I'd been ignoring in cold. I checked the radio I'd found, and it was heavy, like it had some kind of big battery in it. It didn't feel like a moderately powered laptop battery, but like a heavy-duty 20-volt or something. I looked around on it, and it had some USB ports. Must be a newer model. I didn't see them at first because they were covered by rubber plugs. I searched, and sure enough, it had an on-off toggle, and someone had thankfully switched it to off. That meant this unit likely had a full charge still, since these held a charge forever if they were built right. I toggled it on, and a green power light shone brightly. I plugged in the USB cord into the base unit and plugged the micro USB into my phone, and it started charging. I powered my phone back up without looking at it and set it aside. I got a water bottle out and drank nearly the entire bottle and set it aside. Opened a package full of almonds and ate a few. Opened the beef jerky and teared it into a few small pieces and nibbled on a few bits. Then I set a few pieces that I tore into even smaller pieces into a bottle cap on the floor. Then I dripped water into the strips until the pieces reconstituted. I figured sooner or later the beast would come in here and would want to know why I didn't share. Could probably smell me opening that from halfway to wherever it was, so yeah. I wiped my hands off, which I realized would make me smell like food. But thankfully there wasn't going to be any wild dogs running around in here. With that thought, I opened the card and began to read the note inside very slowly. Dear whoever keeps sleeping in the office, your secret is safe with me. It doesn't matter what the reason is, I won't judge. Here are some blankets to keep you warm. Just make sure you put them back in the drawer when you get up. If anyone has a problem, show this to them and talk to me about it. MF CEO. I put the note back down in shock, and with tears welling up, I folded it back into its envelope respectfully. As I drifted off to sleep, I saw over the doorway a sign that looked to be made out of wood, plastic, copper, steel, and glass. The sign said MF CEO. I drifted off to sleep, and as the comfort began to interact with the exhaustion, I forgot to set my alarm. I don't know how long I slept. Chapter 27. Next morning. I woke up with a cat next to me. At first I thought I was back home and started petting the cat. I pet it for a few minutes and it stretched. I wiped the sweat from my eyes before they could burn with my sleeve. I blinked a few times and the night's events caught up to me. I checked the tags on the cat's collar. The side opposite the numbers said SHTF, so I guess that was the cat's name. It was toasty warm in here now. I looked down to where I'd put the jerky and it was gone. Cat liked the jerky, I guess. The salt isn't great for them, but a little treat isn't going to hurt. I get up and check all my pockets. Everything was there, including the new set of keys. I shut the heat off and carefully tucked the warm heating panel system I had made into the office to tidy up. I grabbed another water bottle from the few I'd brought in with me. Then I grabbed a new bag of jerky and almonds to eat. I checked down at my phone and several hours had passed. I scanned through the radio channels a bit on the radio trying to find some news. There was no good news and no way I was going out there alone. According to what I could find over local chatter, people were saying the lights never came back on. The power never came back on, period, and nobody knew exactly why. The news stations and everyone local was broadcasting off generators or whatever reserve power they had. My phone had gotten back to almost full charge, but I noticed no more cell tower signal. I guess that was it for cell service, so I put my phone into airplane mode so I could still use it as a computer and camera. I hope the pissed off Core City looters would probably never have the attention span to get where I was. There would still be the occasional 5 or 10 people that wanted the thrill of smashing things and terrorizing people in their local area, though, or if they had a grudge about a specific place. Who knows? I tried to lay low, absorbing what I was hearing, but it wasn't long before the building had attracted unwanted attention. Something about how this place was destroying and murdering the environment or some crap. I looked down at them and they were all in black clothes with their faces covered. I'd seen them on TV for months, destroying everything in their path, and if you didn't 100% agree with their ideology, they would brutally beat you up the second they had the opportunity. The media had heavily censored this, but the live feeds of the events on the internet had told a completely different story. I honestly couldn't pick out as many specific topics through the sound-resistant windows. I got out my camera and tried to take some pictures and video through the window as discreetly as I could. My flash was always off by default because the flash triggered my migraines and felt like it lagged the camera. There was a time I'm pretty sure I thought I heard fascist thrown in there a few times for good measure and lots of other inflammatory rhetoric. Also, some environment, this and that. Maybe some of them got fired from here and hated the building for it. Maybe they thought this was a global company or something. It was probably a thrown together group of all the mixed things they were pissed off about. I guess they were out there yelling to see if they could spark any security to come out. Maybe a passerby would try to intervene or see if the cops were going to show up first. These groups usually attacked infrastructure first to lure people to them and then attack brutally and without provocation. I always tried to listen to these rants in the past to practice threat assessment. This is one of the event types that always ended up with violence, unfortunately. This definitely wasn't going to be a peaceful sit-in. I stopped gathering evidence and data and trying to come up with a plan. I turned the radio to scan through the pre-programmed UHF channels that I had noticed, which had sounded like private chatter earlier. I hoped the people that were operating on that frequency list would care about this developing situation. I kept repeating that there was a mob outside the waste, trash, fiercely recycling center, all in black, wanting to attack it. I would pause and let go of the buttons, then I would repeat it twice and go to the next channel that was pre-programmed in. There were 5 or so pre-programmed channels. The people outside had been alternating between nonsensical reasons that they were going to wreck the place. Then they were saying tons of other horrible things that they were going to do after that, and lots of fascist government. As they spoke, they would all waggle their improvised weapons and tools around with various hoots and hollers. For weapons, I could see it looked like they had ball-peen hammers, screwdrivers, and 2x2 lumber. Probably left over from a protest that they'd been at. I knew, though, that they also liked to carry carabiners that they used as improvised knuckles, and put nails in their 2x2s and all kinds of other horrible hidden surprises. Finally, building off each other, they reached the pitch to actually do something. It never takes them long after they've assembled, and they get pissed quickly and don't have a very long attention span. I could build this also, something very different from before. That feeling in the air. I set the radio aside and checked all my pockets one last time and went out to face them. I wasn't getting around them, and sooner or later they would have found me. I couldn't have them getting loose in the building because they could just ram their truck straight through the lobby if they really wanted to. So it was settled. I needed to hold them outside, at least 7, with 3 of them that I could see looking serious. Ideally, in this situation, there would be a leader I could take out and the rest would scatter, but these groups often didn't have a leader at all. When there were leaders, they were usually at the back and completely unapproachable. With that thought, I mashed down the button to the fence. I lifted it up, went under, set it down, and the fence's locks reset. And I went down to the stairs into the lobby. Chapter 28, Courtyard. The ones that could have seen me early were blinded with the rising sun reflecting off the lobby's reflective glass exterior. The ones that would have heard me couldn't over their truck running, causing disruptive noise. So they didn't see or hear me coming out the first set of doors. Then I saw what they were doing. They were hooking their pickup to the door with chains to rip the doors off. Those doors would be locked with giant bolts that there was no way to open without more keys. so they were otherwise impassable by the attempted invaders. I waited until they were looking the other way and made my way towards the front desk. I looked around quickly and found what I was looking for. Underneath the desk had a pressure plate to unlock the front doors. I pressed the plate and the front doors unbolted. The group outside thankfully hadn't heard the doors unbolt over their coordinative procedures. I knew I had to be quick because opening the inner door might cause a reflection that would catch their eye. I opened the inner door and rushed the final few feet to the outer door. I kicked the second door open and smashed the closest guy to the building's door that was chaining the door up to the truck. The rest was a blur with my blade and sidearm. I cleared my clothing with my weak arm and drew my concealed sidearm with my strong, dispatching two necks nearest me with multiple center mass shots. From there, with my weak arm, I drew my blade from concealment and began slashing my closest target again. He was the one I had initially stunned with the door. He tried to reach for my gun arm, but he could not get to it past the defensive slashing. At that point, I got blindsided with the truck and then trapped partially underneath it. SHTF the cat was suddenly at my side and lunged at a fourth one, taking them down as they had been advancing at me to finish me off. I only saw that carnage for a second before I had to look at other threats, as he was no longer one. I had really been planning on the Marauders running, but I think they'd worked themselves up to such a fervor that it had unfortunately passed that option. I wanted to switch mags now, as my shorter mag was either empty or close to it. I tried to get into my cargo pants to get my extended and full mag, but the truck impact really scrambled my brain and arm up. My left hand wasn't working well at this point. I thought if I rolled completely under the truck, I could think for a second and avoid getting curb stomped. So that's what I did. From the relative safety of under the truck, I could see that nobody was advancing, but nobody was retreating either. They were trying to surround me so they could pull me out. I think I was getting called a militia guy at this point from the attackers. I was trying to reload still and get my backup mag slammed in as I noticed the remaining Marauders regrouped and formulated a new plan. They were yelling at the driver that I was under the truck and to drive off me so they could get to me. I knew at that point that I was going to be losing my concealment in a few seconds. I finally rolled over to start my mag switch, and that's when I heard a big truck coming in fast, and that's when all hell really broke loose. Everyone left standing was turned to mist, and SHTF the cat took off around the back. I heard some heavier rounds go through the truck's windshield and slam onto something above me. And then I heard boots on gravel, a few more loud cracks, and then more boots hitting the ground and gravel. Finally, there were a few more loud cracks with some clears being announced. One guy said something to the effect of, "Well, I guess I'll start digging." Another, a girl, pulls something out of the truck above me, which hits the gravel with a whoomp. Then gets in the truck talking about how she can drive anything, and drove the truck off me. That is all I remember before I passed out. Chapter 29, Meet the Team. I regained consciousness somewhat in the lobby after a few hours, and I remember them saying to each other that I wasn't one of their coworkers. Another question that I was wearing one of their jackets, which really confused them. That's partially why they couldn't decide exactly what to do with me. But I was with the cat, and the cat was there trying to wake me up, which confused them also. My sidearms and blades were out of reach, not that I could move very fast anyway after taking that huge hit from the truck. It looked like my sidearm had been cleared with my mags out anyway, which was fine. I remembered that my first mag had run dry anyway. "Guys," I said much less confidently to the crew of guys, a guy in a Santa hat and a gal, and much more groggily than I wanted. With that, I swear I had like 8 ARs and an AK pointed at me. And who must have been their leader said to put them down, as if this was a common thing. This made the cat very happy that I was awake, and it jumped on me, then laid down as if it claimed me. I told them the story. They said I could keep the coat and gloves. They told me they got my message and that they weren't a militia, and that I needed to learn how to use a ham radio properly. I told them I would definitely learn. They got me up to speed that cell service was indeed down, landlines were up, so everything portable was going to be radios. So yeah. Also, they thanked me for saving their workplace and their cat, and that it was important because Command deemed this facility mission critical. They didn't elaborate on who Command was or why this place was mission critical. I assumed it's because the place could somehow generate power. I saw on the table that they had their keys back. Then I asked if I could get up and go home. They said they would drive me home, and I responded that the gesture would be much appreciated. A hand popped out, and they slowly helped me up. A medic asked me some concussion-related questions, and I confirmed I had indeed suffered a mild concussion. He gave me some acetaminophen and said I needed to sleep more. I took the meds and with a water bottle they handed me and agreed to the medic's order. My head hurt really bad, worse than usual. They asked to make sure I had some spare food at home, and I did. I've been unemployed several times, and keeping an overabundance of spare food on hand had become the norm. It started about 4 years ago when I had ridden through this economic dump before last, in which I had actually been able to start a decent stock. On the way to their trucks, I noticed the attempted raiders' truck was nowhere to be found, with no trail as to where it could have gone. There was also no blood readily apparent, with a scent of bleach in the air. There also appeared to be some newer gravel in some spots. One of them smirked at me and reminded me I would also want to throw my clothes in the laundry. I simply responded with a thanks, will do. I didn't look down, but I imagined I was covered in a biohazard situation. The medic had cleaned up my cuts and scrapes, though I realized I felt burning in several places where he had disinfected my wounds. Thankfully, the cuts and scrapes happened when I went down and was rolling in the gravel. The likelihood of cross-contamination would be very low. Chapter 30. Finally going home. The team drove me home after I told them where to go. That left several people to guard the facility, and on the way to my subdivision there was several homes on fire already. I guess I don't know what to think besides these people are crazy. Did people really keep lists of who they wanted to hit specifically during such events? I'd always heard they did, and well, I guess it was true. When we got close to my subdivision, they got on a radio in the truck and gave someone some call signs and codes. In a few moments, they got some codes back. I guess that meant that we were safe to keep going forward. My subdivision had already been blocked off by cars. I know I had talked to my neighborhood about that, but nobody seemed to want to help with me because nothing like that would ever happen, duh. It seemed like someone took over and made it happen pretty much instantaneously. All of the houses were fine, I was happy to declare. I thanked them. They said it was okay to walk from here. They told me who to talk to get the right radio. Then they told me that he could get it programmed and then I could start helping. They said I was part of the team if I wanted to be, just give them my name and their name, and I said thanks and will do. I hopped out of the truck and headed home. As I parted the truck, I heard them say some call signs, that there was one coming to the gate. The gate responded, and to my home I went. I fed my kitty and checked her water. It was dirty as always, so I rinsed it out, refilled it, and went to bed. I remember getting sniffed many times. My cat was downloading the other cat's information for their cat database. I patted my cat on the head a few times and passed out from my cat's kneading. Epilogue. Home. Subdivision. Day after collapse. I had slept for a few hours or so before my cat started opening the cabinet door about an inch, and then letting it bounce shut. Opening the cabinet door about an inch, and then letting it bounce shut. just to hear it bonk rapidly on the rubber nubs it had. That was the end of book 1 of PNW Affliction. This is an excerpt from book number 2 of PNW Affliction called The Barless Prison. Chapter 1, Wake Up. Almost 2 years after the collapse, in the autumn. I had slept for a few hours or so before my cat started opening the cabinet door about an inch and then letting it bounce shut. Then she would open the cabinet door about an inch and then let it bounce shut, simply to hear it bonk rapidly on the rubber nubs it had. I had opened my eyes a bit, closed them again, and opened them again, and I realized, and then I remembered I wasn't in my room at all. Well, not in my room in my house anyway. It'd been 2 years since the collapse. I was in that damn prison now. There was no cat bonking on the cabinet door. It was someone bordering on lunacy with nothing else to do. That was Double XL bonking on the cabinet. I had no clue if he was acting crazy intentionally or not, or if there was a difference. I decided to leave him alone for now. Double XL noticed I had finally stirred, though, nodded, and quietly whispered, "Hey, XDS," so nobody would hear. We all had code names, and nobody knew each other's real name. We shed them all when we got caught and locked up here by the other side. I could hear tormented screams coming down the hall as usual, with never a clue as to why. The rumors being, of course, test subjects for who knows what. People returned to their cells more scared and fearful than before. Well, I call them cells, but they're more like cubbies, I guess, or nooks. I don't know. Basically, the rooms don't have doors. Technically, we're free to leave whenever we want, but nobody ever can or does. At that moment, sounds of stark raving terror attached to a person run down the hallway. After him, 3 people in nearly all black, nearly light absorbent clothing move in pursuit, pick up the person who crawled into a ball, and carry him back down the hall from the direction he came. Whatever that guy saw in his mind, it must have been horrible. And that was an excerpt of book number 2. You can find these on Amazon, Kindle. Just look for PNW Affliction. And they're all very affordable. And thanks for hanging out and listening. And if you could share this with a friend, that would be awesome. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell your friends and all that. And thank you. Goodbye.